7:07 on Thursday, and I'd like to call the Concord Finance Committee meeting to order. So I'm going to take a roll call vote. Chris Reynolds, I'm here. Dee Ortner.
Present.
Kathy Kukalo.
Present.
Mary Hartman.
Here.
Parashar Patel.
Here.
Ray Andrews.
Here.
Eric Dahlberg.
Here.
Lois Wassoff.
Here.
Dean Banfield.
Here.
John Hickling.
Present.
Brian Taylor.
Present.
Peggy Briggs.
Present.
And I think that's everybody. Is there anybody I missed? I think I have everybody. Let me see here. There seems to be Don Kupka. Chris Carmody, can you promote Don Kupka? He's in the, to be a panelist. He's a new member. It's KUPKA. You'll see him.
We're doing that now, and we're also adjusting Carrie's permissioning, which there seems to be a conflict with Zoom right now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think I saw Don. Hello, Don.
Hello, everybody. Boy, my first day on the committee and already I got promoted.
That's all right. We'll count you as here. Okay, all right, good. So we have a quorum. We'll open the meeting, and I assume Carrie will come in a second. So first order of business, we have some minutes. So I want to give a shout out to Lois, who's been very helpful in us starting to get the minutes back in order here. So we have minutes from April 22nd, 2021. They're rather extensive, but I'd like to ask if there are any comments on those minutes.
Get that.
Good job.
Okay, no comments. Then I will take a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so I'm going to take a roll call vote on the approval of the minutes. Chris Reynolds, aye. Dee Ortner.
I was absent, so I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Eric Dahlberg.
I wasn't yet on the committee, so I'll likewise abstain.
Okay. Kathy Kukalo.
Yes.
Mary Hartman.
Yes.
Parashar Patel.
Yes.
Ray Andrews.
Yes.
Lois Wassoff.
Ironically, since I was absent at the meeting, although I watched the entire recording in order to do these as a sample set of minutes, I guess I should abstain.
Well, you don't have to.
All right, then I say yes. I'll say yes, because I watched the minute. I watched the entire recording twice.
Good. Dean Banfield.
Yes.
John Hickling.
I'm going to say yes.
John, thank you, John. Much obliged. Brian Taylor.
Yes.
Peggy Briggs.
Yes.
And Don Kupka.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay, all right, that's good. So we've got the minutes taken care of. Okay, so chair's comments and correspondence. I'm not going to have a lot of comments. I'm just going to walk through the agenda for this evening, but I do want to introduce our new member. So Don Kupka is joining us tonight. So he's taking the position that Andrea left. So Don, maybe you could just take a few minutes and introduce yourself to the committee and tell us why you're here.
Sure, thanks, Chris. I'm happy to. So I'm been in Concord for a good more than 20 years, and am happy to finally be contributing something, hopefully, to the town. By way of background, I've done sort of Wall Street finance, and I've also an architect who's done affordable housing. So I've kind of been in a few different places, and maybe that gives me a little bit of a different perspective. I currently have a small RIA office here in town, and as I say, I've been a taxpayer and a resident, and been looking for some sort of a way that I can contribute to Concord. Had a wonderful introduction from you, Chris. So thank you very much for your time over New Year's to have that call, and looking forward to getting to know the rest of you.
Well, terrific. That's great. Well, we welcome you, Don, and I'm sure we'll enjoy getting to know you, and we're looking forward to it. So thank you for joining us. Okay, on the agenda tonight, we have, once again, an action-packed agenda for this evening, folks. So we're gonna have an update on guidelines from Parashar. So we're gonna, he has some nice slides for us to kind of give us a reset as to where we are. I asked Kerry to give us an update on ARPA. So a few weeks ago, the select board had a session where they had certain committees. They also had members of the public invited to talk about ARPA funding and ideas for how it could be used. And so I asked Kerry to give us an update on that. Then I'm going to take us briefly through what's going to happen for the hearings. So the next 3 weeks, FinCom has a series of hearings on warrant articles. So I'll talk to you about process on those. And then we're going to get into the warrant articles. So the first hearing is on articles related to the town. So tonight we're going to go through all of those articles to the extent they have financial implications. We're going to try and touch on the ones that have financial implications. You'll have a chance to hear more and ask questions at the hearings, but this should be a good place for you to be grounded in what we're going to hear about next week. So that's the purpose of it, okay? And then Lois is going to talk to us about the upcoming Finance Committee report and how we're going to divide up that work and get that done. So that's coming up. So Lois has a nice presentation on that. And then if we have time, we're going to get to observer reports, and we will have public comment as well. So we have lots going on. Any questions on that? Okay, good. I think that's, from correspondence. So you saw in the materials that we had correspondence on Article 46 from a citizen. And then I also included there for you some slides that the article sponsor had prepared. We're going to hear from Mr. Posner this evening on that, but it'll be brief. We're not going to go through those slides. We're going to go through really a discussion of the financial implications associated with Article 46. And I also asked Diane Proctor, because we had some questions last time on CPC. So that's a town article. So we're gonna touch on your questions with respect to CPC. And Diane graciously agreed to sort of sit here in the background and wait for us to come up with those. So we have Diane waiting, so I appreciate that. And I think that's it. Okay, so if there's no other questions, I'm going to move to the update on guidelines with Parashar.
Oh, sorry, Chris. One quick question, Chris, just
Sure.
on something you mentioned on
Yes.
Article 46. Is not the person commenting on Article 46 one of the people proposing Article 47?
47 is actually proposed by Mark Galis. So that is Tanya's husband, but I believe he is the sponsor of it. I could be wrong on that, but I thought that Mark was the sponsor.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, great. Parashar.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chris. Can everybody see the slides here?
Yes.
Yes.
So I don't know about the rest of you, but it's been a long time since I thought about this. So I actually needed to recreate history and kind of walk backwards from walk from the summer to here. So bear with me as I try to just give everybody a sense of where we currently stand relative to the guidelines. So if we go back to December, you'll actually go back to the summer, you'll recall the preliminary guideline we had set at 2.7%. That resulted in an overall guideline increase of about 2.5 million. And a guideline amount across the three budget organizations, 94.6 million. that was a number that was out there during the summer and through the fall. And as the town and the schools began formulating their budget, that was a number that they had in the back of their minds. And then on December 2nd, I think Carrie and the town came in with their projected budget request, 30.9 million. And then on the 9th, CPS and CCHS came in with their projected budget request. And I say projected because I think they were very clear that they were still in the process of formulating the final submission and final recommendations. It was a work in progress. But based on what they were projecting at the time, there were gaps across all three units relative to the guideline. And, you know, kudos to everybody. They said they were going to continue plugging away to try to get to the guideline numbers that we had originally proposed in the preliminary guideline. December 15th, we all met again, and taking into account the presentations that the town and the schools made regarding their strategic priorities, where they wanted to go, et cetera, we actually increased the guidelines for both the town and CCHS. And so the initial gap from the previous slide, you can see here 1.9. We decided to increase the guidelines for the town and the CCHS by $250,000 each, total of $500,000. And when you take a look at the gap as a result of our final guideline, again, relative to the projected number that they had been working with, the gap was about $1.3 million, right? So now they knew the final guideline numbers and again, continued sharpening their pencils and looking at the budgets and kind of seeing where they can make changes. So, well, let's see, I went way too far here. So that's where we stood on December 15th. As of today, they've changed their numbers and they now have a much more solid footing in terms of what their proposed spending request is. So again, the first two columns, final guideline, the guideline amount, 96.4 is where everybody was in December with a gap of 1.3. And what you have here labeled current fiscal year 2023 guideline proposed spending is where things stand now. And by the way, I will circulate the slides for folks too. But you can see the total is now 96.1 million. There is still a gap relative to our guideline amount. You can see the $1.0 million gap. And I think we've got Carrie online and she can better walk us through why the town's spending proposal is currently higher than what was projected in December. It's higher by about 900, by roughly 600 and some odd $1,000. But she's got a plan to close the gap. And again, I think hopefully she can address any questions that folks might have, but she's going to carry forward $600,000 of unspent appropriations from the current fiscal year and then transfer the remaining amount from an existing capital article to support tier 1 capital spending. The Concord Public Schools current spending proposal doesn't meet the guidelines yet, but from what I understand, the school committee is still continuing to assess how to bring the proposed spending down to guideline levels. So that's still, I think, a work in progress. You can see the gap is about $312,000. CCHS, actually their proposed spending, and actually I shouldn't quite say it this way, and maybe I know Lori's on the phone, on the meeting, but I'm not sure it's a spending proposal so much as how much money the school expects to receive from Concord is probably the longer way about saying it. But they're expecting less money from Concord because two factors. You can see state aid was higher than they were previously anticipating. So they're getting revenue from other sources. And then I think they're also getting revenue from other sources, Chapter 70, 71, Circuit Breaker, and the Metco grant. So again, maybe more a matter of revenue from other sources and less a matter of spending coming down. But the net result is less money from Concord. Let me pause here because I know some of us have questions on the town side, and I'm sure Lori may or may not want to clarify anything that I misspoke on the school side. So first, let me turn it over to Carrie, and maybe Carrie, can you just explain a little bit about why the spending increased and then how you're proposing to close that gap?
Sure. Sorry, we are having Zoom problems across the board tonight. So I was just working with another committee to try to solve their problems. So I think we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting, that we went back and I think worked really hard to try to put together an operating budget that met the guideline. The issue that we had is that our contract settlements and the amount that we needed to reserve for fiscal 23 for non-union salary increases to make up for what has happened with salaries over the last couple of years, we just were not able to meet the guideline. But we do have an opportunity, because we essentially have some vacancies, unfortunately, in fiscal 22. So we're not going to expend all of the fiscal 22 appropriation. And we would like to just bring that forward to help fill the gap for fiscal 23. Now, I understand that creates a problem for fiscal 24, but we are hoping by fiscal 24 that our revenues are going to be 100% back on track and growing as they had before the pandemic. On the capital, tier 1 capital side, so our guideline includes both the operating and the tier 1 capital. And this is because years ago, we used to appropriate the tier 1 capital within the operating budget. Now, I believe this is the 3rd year that we have pulled that out, the tier 1 capital, and put that into the capital article. So we now appropriate tier 1 and tier 2 capital together. And the reason that we do that is because the budget article is tied to the fiscal year. So when the fiscal year closes, the ability to expend out of that article closes. A capital article stays open as long as there is funding available. So there are often times when we had money for capital items that we would order, and this happens with some of our specialty vehicles, the fire trucks, where there's a really long lead time and we may cross the fiscal year. And we used to just encumber those funds, but the auditors really had given us kind of a hard time about that and said that the better practice is to have this appropriated separate. So I apologize for that long-winded explanation, but the guideline is based on both the operating and tier 1. So we have a fiscal policy that says that our capital spending, our tier 1 capital spending, should be 2 to 3% of the budget. And it's really, it's the entire budget. It's not just the town budget. We base that on the entire budget. And so that's about $2 to $3 million if you assume that the recurring portions of the operating budgets are about $100 million. Up until fiscal 20, we were right on target, spending about $2 million per year. In 21, when we had to revise the budgets because of the pandemic, we dropped the tier 1 spending from about 2 million down to 1.2. And the finance committee we had conversations and asked if we would consider that. And that was a way to preserve the operating expense, the programs and services without increasing the tax rate too much. Then the pandemic obviously carried into the current fiscal year, and our tier 1 capital is at $800,000. We need to get back up to that at least $2 million. We have we've really lost ground. We have those capital expenses that we just can't keep cutting back. And so that's where most of our expense, the increase is. We had talked to you throughout the budget process. We were going to try to make that work, and we just were not able to cut back the capital budget to meet the guideline. So the tier 1 capital is at $1,509,000. And that was really sort of the bare bones we thought we could get away for in fiscal 23. The other thing I would like to point out, and then I'll stop for questions, is as we are moving forward with the middle school project, and we will be going to market to issue debt for the middle school, we really need to be following our financial policies. The rating agency is going to look at what we're doing and making sure that we are following our financial policies. And we know we're already going to be at bare bones with free cash at 5% if the proposed spending is approved at town meeting. And then to also be well under target for tier 1 spending. I'm just concerned about that. And so we were able to come up with a plan that did not increase property tax, but still allowed us to get closer to the targets that we feel that we need to be at based on the financial policies.
So Carrie, thank you for the detailed explanation. I guess the big question I have, and maybe I'm hoping it's relatively simple for my simple mind today, but the gap previously was $600 and some odd $1,000, $655, and now it's $909. So I'm curious, the $250,000 difference, is that all because capital, you just went back and couldn't scrub the capital enough to where you felt like you really couldn't cut back on it, and that's the increase is that account for that increase? I'm a bit confused there.
Yeah, so if you look down at your notes, the 309,700, that's the additional capital. And I think the difference between the 250 something and the 309 probably has to do with the final where the transfers from the enterprise funds fell out.
Okay.
So I think that's probably what the difference is, that until we have the budget set, we make estimates on what the transfers are. But once the budget is set, then we know exactly what the transfers are. And I think that's why it's not exactly the 309,700.
And then just the one last question, $600K of unspent appropriations. What's your current projection of what you expect to be unspent by the end of the fiscal year? Is it more than 600K?
Yes, it is. The first estimate that we made was just over $1 million. Okay. We will be running the year-end estimates again, probably the beginning of next week. We just finished the budget document, and hopefully we'll still be around that.
Okay.
And then that additional money or that additional unspent appropriation would fall to free cash.
Okay. So let me open it up to the rest of the committee. I can't see everybody, so if you can raise your hand. I see Chris's hand.
Yeah, just
hand.
Parashar, just one. Could Chris Carmody promote Lori Hunter, please?
Yeah, I'm just taking care of that now.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. So Carrie, maybe I missed this, Parashar. So the 309,700. Carrie, you said we had a plan to make sure that didn't affect the taxpayer. I just, you may have just answered this, but I didn't follow it. Can you tell me how it is we can move it?
Sure. So back in 2017, the special town meeting approved a $1.5 million standalone warrant article for town technology. And that was for, you know, everything from, we had talked about licensing and permitting, the new financial software, archives management, a phone system. It really was across the board. And so this really is what I'm proposing is to move 309,700 from that technology article into the fiscal 23 technology. I mean, into the fiscal 23 tier 1. Now, the main purpose of doing that, because the items, the technology items that we have in the fiscal 23 tier 1 plan could just as easily be charged directly to that article. But by transferring it into the capital, then I can show on paper that our tier 1 spending is 1.5 million versus the 1.2 million. And I think it's just easier for the rating agency to see that we are closer to our spending targets for capital.
Have we done this before?
Have we? We have definitely transferred from capital article to capital article it's typically when we close out that we would transfer.
Okay, and that article is not closed out, is that correct?
It's not closed out.
Okay. Okay. So we don't typically do this until we close it out, but for the reasons you stated, you would like to do it now.
I would like to do it now because I think it puts us in a better position when the rating agency looks at us and is, you know, determining adherence to existing financial policies.
Right. How much is left out of the $1.5 million?
So there is, there's about 700,000 that is not committed. We have essentially finished the licensing and permitting project. We have the financial software upgrade or the implementation to the new ERP system that is underway, and all of the funding needed to support that project has been committed. So there's about 700 or so that is uncommitted. The next largest project is the records management, but that is probably more than a year out.
Okay, thank you.
Mary, and then we've got Dean and then Kathy. Mary, go ahead.
Thank you. I got a follow-on question to Chris's actually, Carrie. So this 309,000, are we reclassifying it to tier 1 capital? Are we doing that because we want to show that we're classifying it properly for the rating agencies, or that we're budgeting enough money in that tier? Is it, so which is it?
That we're budgeting enough for
in that
tier
okay.
1
okay.
capital.
Okay. Okay. And then my second question is, couldn't we have done that and still, we're doing that, but what that means is that we're actually spending 309,000 more in other operating expenses. I mean, couldn't we have done that and then that's a reduction in our guideline spending, but we're not really reducing operating spending by moving this out.
We're not reducing operating spending.
So by actually, let me say it this way. So by moving this, reclassifying this, you're actually freeing up money to be spent on other operating expenses.
To be spent on capital. Oh, you mean if I, well, I guess you could look at it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Dean?
Next?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I just want to sort of understand this recharacterizing of the 3097. We have a spending authority that was voted at town meeting on an independent standalone article. When that was voted, I guess my understanding of that is that that is not actually part of any operating budget. It's just a spending authority that is independently voted for. Is that the way that was? Am I characterizing the original vote correctly? That it was outside of our operating budgets?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Okay. So we have this separate, account where you've got the right to spend whatever we authorized. And we're taking a chunk of that account and we're saying, no, we want to pull that into an operating budget and call that part of a specific year's operating budget. So you're kind of recharacterizing it as operating funds out of this prior understanding, which is that it's a separate line item or a separate account. Is that correct? You're basically recharacterizing it into.
Well, so I wouldn't call it operating. It's because it's not operating. It's going to support the tier 1 capital.
Okay, so I guess the only thing that we do as a finance committee is we treat it as part of the guideline, but it's still not these capital items in tier 1 are still not operating. They're not part of the operating budget.
They're right. They're not.
Okay.
And you,
because
I was just, oh.
Go ahead.
All I was going to say is the finance committee has talked about just pulling that tier 1 capital out of the guidelines discussion, but we've never done that.
Okay. So when we, a few years ago, decided to pull it out for a standalone article, the finance committee sort of artificially continued to treat it as part of the guidelines process and part of our operating number that we work with. So
yes.
that's just an accident of history. But from a formal perspective, it's now in a standalone article. It's a standalone authority that allows you to spend on these capital items. Okay, so we're moving it from one place to the current. So that when that was voted, it was for a specific range of characterized assets, technology assets. If we move it into this year's operating budget, would you have $309,000 worth of technology assets to expend it on?
Yes, and that's how we came up with that number, because
okay.
we lined up the technology spend in tier 1 for 23, and it totaled that number.
That's fine. So my questions are answered. We authorized it for a specific use. We're recharacterizing it into this year's article, and it's going to continue to have the use that it was authorized for. That's the point I needed to get to. Sorry for the length of trying to understand it. Thank you very much. I'm good. Yeah. I'm good.
Kathy, and then Don.
I believe that Dean asked the question, though a different way, that I had, and that was if the town voted $1.5 million to be spent on a particular project, is it within our scope to be moving some of that money out of that project and into something else? And that's one is, do we have the authority to do that? And number two, doesn't that then say that something that was approved to be purchased is not being purchased? So that's question 2.
Sure. So I sent an email, I think maybe I only sent it to Parashar, with a link to the vote on the 2017 article. And it is for technology, and it's very broad, and it lists the different types of technology that the funding could be used for. So the spending that's proposed in the fiscal 23 tier 1 capital falls within the 4 corners of that article. So it's not a change in use. And it's not for things that, it's not for new items or there aren't things that, well, I'm not sure how to explain it other than we could just have easily charge these items to that article. But I'm trying to demonstrate in an easy to understand way when the rating agencies look at us that we are fairly close to our tier 1 spending.
Okay.
So it's not, the items that we're looking to purchase are within the scope of the article. We're not going to make other technology investments because of the spending that we're doing here.
Thank you.
Don, welcome aboard.
Yeah, thank you, Parashar. Carrie, thank you for that explanation. That helps me to understand it a bit. And so my last question, building on what Kathy and Dean have asked, is if we approve that spend, if we spend that money out of that 2017 capital, and then we also approve the spend in this budget, are we not double appropriating funds?
No, because the motion to fund this article is one of the funding sources is going to be a transfer from the 2017 article. So the new money appropriation is going to be the 1.5 million less the 309 that we're transferring from the other article.
Okay, so then that makes sense. Then will we have enough money in that article to complete the objectives that were approved by the voters?
Yes.
Carrie,
okay. I don't see any other hands up.
Oh,
Carrie, I'm assuming we're not buying 3G technology with that money anymore.
We're not buying 3G.
Just a joke.
I just have one more question for Carrie.
Sure.
So when we described this in the at town meeting, Carrie, it just what you just described to Don, it will be clear to folks what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it'll be in the description somewhere. Is it in the warrant now, or is it something that would be coming at town meeting?
Well, it will be in the motion.
Okay.
And we certainly could look at doing a separate handout if it's not clear. But it definitely will be in the motion where all of the funding sources to support this particular article.
Okay, and the motion gets shown on the screen and so forth at the meeting.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I just want to make it clear to the citizens how this is being funded. And as you say, the good news is it's a way to increase the spending back to more normal levels without having to hit the taxpayer again, on the assumption that when next year comes around, well, we probably won't have vacancies or perhaps this capital item to scoop from, that we'll have revenues to bring us back up to the, I think you said 2 to 3 million that we normally spend on tier 1, because it's troubling, right? If we can't get back there.
It's very difficult. I mean, this is the funding that we use to replace police cruisers, some of our rolling stock in public works, technology, obviously we're talking about that, the funding that we use for sustainability improvements and.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so Kathy and Dean, were those your previous hands or do you guys have?
Well, I put mine back up. So
I'm sorry, I need to put it down.
I did put mine back up because I have another question.
Okay.
And the follow-up question is, what was the funding source identified in the 2017 article for the $1.5 million capital article back then?
It was overlay surplus.
Okay, so that's already been set aside, and there's an account, or there's some accounting for where this money is coming. This money is on hand. We're not. Okay, that answers your question. Overlay surplus. Thank you.
Okay, I see Lori is on. Lori, I don't know if you heard my summary of what's happening with the CPS and CCHS budgets. Obviously, clearly still scrubbing, I think, CPS budget based on my understanding, and hopefully the summary I put there for CCHS changes in Concord's contribution are clear. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Otherwise, I'll open it up to other members for questions.
Yeah, I think, Parashar, I'd like to clarify a bit on both budgets, not for any great length of time. CPS, we have been scrubbing. We've dropped the delta down from the original 450, 468. 312 is where we're at. We brought it down 40,000 almost last week. I don't know how much more we're going to be able to scrub there with great faith. We've been looking and we've taken risks on enrollments. We've taken risks on attrition of staff. We've taken some risks on special education. I just want to note that much of that increase above contractual obligations is because of the intensive special education programs. And that's to save money. And we've run all sorts of analysis on that I can send to you to show why that's cost effective and good for kids, of course. So I'm not sure how much more we've got to go there without some painful cuts, and hope we could talk about that. At the high school, it has been a story of revenue. When we voted the budget on the 18th of January, the 212 that you see there that's noted on the slide was what we had used to close the delta and get to guideline. By the time we met on the 1st of February, the governor's budget had come out, and we had an unexpected, revenue input that we didn't budget for. So we, in good faith, dropped below the guideline at an overall total of 225,000, which equates to 174,000 under guideline for Concord. So we hope that's good news to you, that we're actually coming in that much under guideline. Of course, you're going to hear me pitch that you might consider putting some of that towards CPS. So we were thrilled to see those numbers come in where they did, and hope we can keep working with you on the CPS side, because we aren't there yet, and I don't know how easily we're going to get there. So thank you for a few minutes.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you, Lori. So, one thing that's become crystal clear in this guideline role is the education around being clear with terms. I had put spending in the columns and describing it that way, but I think it sounds like, at least for the schools, it's less spending and more Concord's contribution. I am curious, both for CPS and CCHS, did the gross spending numbers, how much did they go up by without taking into account the revenue? Just in other words, just on the expenditure side. And I don't need an answer now, but I think it would just be helpful context to know that here's what we actually spent, period, gross spending last year, fiscal year 2022. And here's what we're anticipating or planning to spend for fiscal year 23, the actual money going out the accounts. Does that make sense, that question, Lori?
I think I know what you're asking. Okay. At CPS, we don't have much revenue to work with. We have some grants that come in, but at CCHS, it is a balance of the two, just like it would be for the town side. So we can flesh those numbers out more for you.
Yep,
both
just at a high level.
Numbers right now are a mix of the two.
Yeah, no, just at a high level. Thank you.
Yep.
Don, I see your hand up, and then we'll see other people's hands up.
Thank you, Parashar. Carrie, I have another question for you, and it's two parts, I guess. If there were no remaining gap this year, what would become of the 600,000 unspent from the 2022 budget? And And the second part of that question is, given that 600,000 was unspent from last year, what is the actual percentage increase that you're proposing for this year over the actual spending?
So just so I understand the question, are you asking if we didn't need the $600,000 to support 23, what would happen to that?
Yeah.
Is that okay? So that money would just close to the fund balance, the general fund balance, and it would become part of free cash.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're asking what the percent increase would be if the budget was 600,000 less. Is that what you're?
The actual spending last year to the this year.
Okay. If you give me,
I see it's 3.56%, but that's against as if we had spent that 600 last year, I'm guessing, right?
Right. So just if you just give me a moment, I can do that calculation.
You're asking about the growth rate, is that correct? Is that correct?
Correct.
Ron?
Correct.
Yeah, I think it's about a 5% growth rate from like, in other words, if the 600,000 wasn't spent, it would be a 4.6% increase over 2022.
All right, thanks, sure.
And you'll see how that compares on the next slide to the actual growth rate in a minute, because I actually have the growth rates on the next slide.
So I guess shouldn't we then be putting that 600,000 back into the rainy day funds, and then just as you've taken 500,000 in your previous slide and divided, 250 for the schools and 250 per town, we're actually getting 850 to the town and 250 to the schools. Is that correct? Another way to look at the same thing.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that last question? I didn't understand it. I don't know, Carrie.
Okay, sure. In the previous slide, you showed, Parashar, that we'd previously decided to give changes in guidelines of 500,000, and I believe that that's coming from the source that the 600,000 would go into the unspent funds. Is that correct?
I don't think so, but Carrie, do you know the mechanics, or Chris?
Yeah, it's available from guidelines, so it's not coming from free cash, but it's available for guidelines. So we project revenue, and from all sources, we make an estimate on what property taxes could be based on what we want the levy to be. It's not an easy calculation to explain, Don, right now, but it's available for guidelines is how we do the computation for the change. Yeah, so. That's where it comes from.
Okay, thanks. So essentially we're increasing the guidelines. Unrelated to that, we're allocating 600,000 from free cash this year that was saved last year. Okay, now I got it straight in my head. So thanks for that explanation.
Sure.
Chris and then Mary.
Yeah, so I just wanted to respond to Dr. Hunter's comments. So we very much appreciate the work that you've done, Dr. Hunter, you and the school committee, in looking at the budgets and the revenue the increased revenue that you got on the high school, and putting that back into reducing the allocation. So it's very much appreciated. So I wanted to make sure that you heard that from us. We understand it's not an easy process. I also thought that the conversations with the school committee a couple of meetings ago were very good. So I appreciate the work that's going on there. And I think Parashar, we're going to go through some other slides to talk about projection in the future, because when we look at and we set the guidelines, we're looking not just at this year, but we also look at what's happening next year. And we also, of course, the good news is we have the middle school, and we have to pay for it, right? So we've got some big pressure on the taxes coming up. So we're taking all those things into account, but I don't want you to think we don't appreciate the work that you're doing. We do.
Thank you, Chris. Mary?
Thanks, Parashar. I just have a comment about Dawn's question about the 250 and the 600,000. I think maybe the way that I look at it is the 250 is coming from future property tax increases. The FY23 taxes we're going to raise through property taxes, and the 600,000 is coming from what we raised in this current fiscal year. But the point is that they're both coming from property tax. It's just a timing, but the source is still property tax either way. I hope that helps.
Okay. Any other questions? I just have one more slide and then we'll turn it back over to Chris. Don't see any other hands. So this is the last slide. So basically, after all the puts and takes, comparisons to guidelines, et cetera, I just wanted to step back and actually compare. Again, it's called spending. It's probably more like Concord's contribution, at least on the CCHS part. But the fiscal year 2022 spending subject to guidelines is the first column. You can see in the second column where things stood in December, and then where we are today, the 96.1 million. You can see the change. And again, echo what Chris said a few minutes ago. Very glad that the schools still sort of scrubbing the numbers and went back and, in essence, reduced from the high school Concord's contributions by almost $400,000. Able to reduce, again, the request from the town by 175 for CPS. You can see the gap relative to the budget request, pretty small on the part of CPS and CCHS, obviously 1.63. And then here's down the spending rates from 23 to 22, right, of where things stand today. And I think, now look at the spending rate from here, 22 to 23, you can see it there. And then just a reminder in context, back in October, when after a lot of back and forth and really good work on the part of Jared, Lori, the school committees, Carrie, and the town departments, they gave us 5-year cost projections, which was really helpful, I think, from our perspective in terms of helping set what we thought were reasonable guidelines based on where we see trends going with respect to wages and benefits and other cost inputs. And I just took the 5-year CAGRs from 2022 to 2027 based on those cost projections. And I'm just comparing it to the growth rates that we're going to see if nothing changes between 22 and 23. And I just leave it with that. And I think, understand that the school committee is still looking at CPS, so that number may come down, but we're clearly seeing projected increases for the rest of the 5-year budget window. And I think one of the questions we've got to ask ourselves as a committee, ask ourselves as leaders, and then, as residents of Concord, how sustainable is this? Where are we going to get the funds to meet those needs without an undue increase in taxes and the tax burden? So, to the extent that everybody's been able to sharpen their pencils and really try to get down to the truly required elements, probably going to have to do a lot more of that in the next couple of years. So with that, I'll get off my soapbox, see if folks have any questions, and then turn it back over to Chris.
Hey,
we'll circulate this. John, go ahead.
Thank you, Parashar, for saying that. Just it's also something I've been thinking about and wondering about, and that is how the sustainable growth rate, the SGR, should relate to these numbers. If memory serves, the last rate we calculated was 2.3%, and I'm just wondering how that correlates.
Yeah, it's a good question, and we could kind of go back. Yeah, it's a good question. Clearly, what measures we're using as SGR Are they the right ones? Need to be adjusted, et cetera? Those are all questions I think we discussed last summer. Ultimately decided to use the measures we're using. And maybe it's something for us to think about whether we ought to use something, use a different set of measures. But I think regardless of what we use, ultimately, I think it's also a question of how do we balance that with affordability and how much services do we really want as a town, right? So I'll just leave it at that. Brian.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, one potential answer is that there are some flaws in the assumptions with respect to the SGR. It might not be the answer that everyone wants to hear, but that is also a possibility. So anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah. And by the way, those last two columns have nothing to do with the SGR, right? I mean, those are just numbers.
Right. The SGR, right, was, is really a proxy for inflation. And so we cut it was in the summer. If you updated it, which I did a few times just to take a look at it, right? And it comes out pretty close to where we ended up on the guideline for growth. We weren't that far off. So if you use that formula, so it's a proxy for inflation, and it tied in not too badly, but it certainly is below the number we see for the town here. It's below the 4% in the growth in the growth projections from 22 to 27 as well.
All right, Brian, you've been waiting patiently.
Parashar, can you go back one slide? I just want to spot check something, please. Okay, thank you.
That was easy. That's it. Ray.
Hey, thank you,
question.
Parashar. Oh, are we all set? Oh, Ray has a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
question. We were told last year, I think, that because of the pandemic, that the town's budget really, were able to save like $1 million or something more than that. How much of that impact was carried over into 22? And if so, doesn't that set I won't say artificially, but a non-trending lower number as a spending for 2022?
So
did I ask that in a way that makes Carrie's eyes suggest I was confusing?
You did. And I think what you're saying is 22 was lower because of the pandemic, the spend we didn't do in 21.
Yeah, okay. That's
and
much
I think
better way of saying it, right?
It does. And I think that's why, and Carrie can add to this if necessary, but part of the reason you're seeing the 6.6% growth rate is because we decided to give the town more money on the to spend on the tier 1 and make some of that back. And so that's precisely, I think, what you're seeing. That growth, the higher growth rate is a result of what you're seeing of lower spending in 2022. Does that help answer your question, Ray?
Yeah, that's just confirmation, right? Okay.
Okay. Chris, turn it back over to you for regularly scheduled programming.
Okay, thank you, Parashar. Okay, so we're going to get an update from Carrie on ARPA. And I think she sent out some schedules in advance. Carrie, maybe I really don't want to dive too deep in the schedules with the committee, but to the extent you could give them an overview on where we are in the process, what the process looks like for how the town might determine how ARPA would be spent.
Sure. So the select board has had a couple of different discussions about ARPA. The first one was back in September, and then the second one was in January. The session that we had in January was very well attended, and I know some of you, or maybe several of you, were at that meeting, as were representatives from a number of the boards and committees in town, and just citizens that are interested in hearing more about ARPA. So the town has $5.6 million from ARPA funding. We've received 50% of it, and the other 50% will be here within the next 12 months or so. There are many different ways that the town can spend ARPA funding. There's about 5 different categories. And one of those categories is lost revenue. So one of the ways that the town could spend the ARPA funding is to call this grant lost revenue. And originally in the original regulations that came out, there was a very complicated calculation to determine the amount of lost revenue as a result of the pandemic. We actually went through that calculation and felt that we could justify the full $5.6 million as lost revenue, if not more. In January, a new regulation came out which said that any community that is receiving $10 million or less in ARPA funding can just call all of it lost revenue. So that was helpful, that we didn't actually have to do that calculation. So if you participated in the meeting in January or have followed any of the discussion, you know that there were a lot of people that came and presented a bunch of ideas about how to spend the funding, everything from broadband to water and sewer infrastructure improvements, roadway improvements, addressing transportation issues, affordable housing, addressing some community services, human services issues. There was a request, one of the categories is premium pay, so communities can provide a certain amount of premium pay to attempt to compensate essentially public safety personnel for the additional risk that they took as a result of responding during COVID. So there are a number of different things that were presented as ideas. The select board had a conversation at the meeting in January and then again recently about whether or not to just call this lost revenue, and then to be able to look at spending these funds through a budget, the budget process, the standard budget process, just vetting requests through the budget process. And that gives it the most transparency, the most participation. Things would go to town meeting. As a grant, this funding does not need to be appropriated by town meeting. It can be spent directly. But there definitely was an interest in public participation. And so and then the other side of that is really just have the select board essentially accept proposals for spending and treat it like a grant, and the select board could approve different grant funding. So what the select board decided at the last meeting really was to, or at least what I got out of the discussion, that they would essentially look to allocate 25% of the funding each year for 4 years. So we have a 4-year window beginning in the current year. So we have to have all of the ARPA funding committed by December 31st, 2024, but expended by 2026. And hopefully I have those dates. I believe I have those dates right. So we would have to start in fiscals. We have 22, 23, 24, 25. And that's kind of what we're working with right now. So there definitely would be an opportunity in fiscal 24 and 25 to really look at that 50% of the funding through the lens of budgets and capital spending. For fiscal 22 and 23, we're limited because we're already in fiscal 22. The warrant is set for the town meeting. So we don't have the same ability to sort of put spending through a town meeting process because we don't have a warrant article for 22. We also have limited opportunity for 23 again because the warrant is set for the annual town meeting. And so there are a number of ideas that were proposed. The select board has asked staff to go back and sort of fine tune some of those different proposals and then bring them forward again for consideration. Some of the things that you might have heard, I mentioned transportation. In the fiscal 23 budget, we have funding for a half-time transportation planner. This is a new position there has been a strong push to have a full-time transportation planner. So one of the requests likely will be to supplement that half-time funding to get a full-time transportation planner. There is also a pretty strong request from the business community for some additional funding for economic development, helping either existing businesses that want to expand or renovate, or new businesses that want to come into town, some assistance to help them navigate the permitting process. So those are two examples of things that you might see come up in the short term. The third probably is further discussion on premium pay, since we have received requests from both the police and fire union to consider that. So this is going to be, I think as we're able to dig into some of these areas and put together proposals, they will be coming up to the select board to be looking at and considering in the current fiscal year, next fiscal year, and then beginning in 24, when we're doing the budgeting process for 24, bringing any of those proposals fully through the budget process. So there's as much visibility and access to those discussions as possible. Oh, Chris, you're on mute.
About that. There would be maybe $2.5 million then that would go through some sort of select board grant process, and then $2.5 million that would go through budgets in 24 and 25. Is that how you think about it?
Yeah, I would say that. Now it may be that it's not a true 50-50 split, because I'm not sure that we're going to be able to bring some of these proposals. So I would assume a larger, more than 50% will probably be available to go through the more extensive process.
Yeah.
One thing that I should have mentioned is there is a request from the Affordable Housing Trust for $500,000 for affordable housing initiatives for fiscal 23. The town has, over the last couple of years, approved $500,000 for affordable housing from free cash. And the idea is that when free cash is above 5%, that $500,000 for affordable housing is something that would be considered. And again, we don't have free cash certified yet. We better have it by next week for the public hearing. We are still in the hopper at the state, waiting anxiously. But with the assumption that $1 million of free cash will go to reduce the property tax rate in fiscal 23, and that $500,000 will go into the middle school stabilization fund, that brings us to about 5%. So technically, there isn't money available from free cash to appropriate to affordable housing. The Affordable Housing Trust has asked for consideration of $500,000 of ARPA instead of free cash. And so that is something that we actually would be able to put before town meeting, because that is a warrant article that's on the warrant.
Okay, thank you. So we have a bunch of questions. I'm just going to go around as I see them. Peggy?
Yes, hi. Carrie, you did sort of touch on something that came to my mind, which is this ARPA funding isn't far removed from free cash. One thing, when I was listening to the ideas that you had, I would be a little concerned about putting too much of this funding into new hires and salaries, because those continue on and on after the money is after the 4 years. I'd rather see it spent on hard assets, I guess. That's all.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And we certainly wouldn't want to consider it for anything that we wouldn't be willing to fund within the operating budget. So I do think this is a good opportunity maybe to further investigate, like with economic development. I know there's a strong interest in having a full-time person for economic development, but maybe as a first step, we would look at working with a consultant to help put together a plan. Like what is the framework to make sure that before we just go out and hire a full-time person, that we know exactly what that person is doing, what need it's going to fill. Are there grant opportunities that would come with having somebody in that role, and how what they would be able to do for the community before we just hire somebody. So I'm definitely sensitive to that.
Eric?
Thank you. It sounds like we are taking our time and deciding how to spend this, which I think is appropriate under the circumstances. But does it, Carrie, I understand there's some pretty significant reporting requirements to the Treasury Department as far as how we decide to spend the money. Are we on top of those? And is there any risk that if we don't come up with a spending plan, we could lose that second installment, that second tranche? Is that coming no matter what? Or are we on the hook to kind of lay out a plan to spend it before we get it?
So the first question about the reporting requirements, we just went through a reporting nightmare with the CARES funding. So the ARPA reporting requirements can't be any more cumbersome than CARES. They're different, but we came out on the other side of the CARES reporting. So we're not afraid of whatever the reporting requirements are for ARPA. One of the difficulties is with CARES, we had somebody at the state who, if we had a questionable expense, we knew who we could go to, and they would evaluate whether or not the request we were making, the expense, fell within the scope of that funding. And that was really, really helpful. We don't have that with ARPA, and the state is not getting involved in making decisions about whether or not spending requests meet the requirements. But we do have an avenue for getting some assistance there. The way the money was distributed, we received the first half of the money, and we were told that the second half would come no sooner than 12 months after we received the first, but we don't know exactly when it is coming. I do think that we will have received 100% of the funding at least by that December 31, 2024 date. So I do think that we will have 100% of the funding before it's required to be spent. But if we don't spend it, I'm sure we will need to return it. One thing that I will say, I have been hearing from other communities, because everybody's asking, what is your community doing? How is your community thinking about spending the funding? The communities in this area, a lot of them are saying they are funding one infrastructure project. A lot of them are doing water or sewer, a road project, or broadband. And I think it's just because it's going to be easy to do reporting on one project, and you won't have all the demands on how to spend the money. So that was interesting to hear.
Okay, Dean.
So this is really a pretty simple question. Peggy and I were both on the CPC, and that's basically this process where you evaluate grant requests, you look at how much money you have, and then you kind of spread the peanut butter around to the degree that you possibly can to get as many things done as productively as you can. So this feels similar to that process. when you describe it as budgeting, it doesn't seem like the way this will function is anywhere even adjacent to the town's actual operating budget or its other budgeting processes. This just seems like it's more like a trust fund that there are established rules for how you can extract funds from it. You know, you make a request, and there will be either a warrant article in the future, or the select board will make decisions for the first few years. Am I characterizing that more or less correctly? Like, this is kind of like free cash adjacent is the way this feels to me.
I think that's fair. I mean, it's one-time funding, and we certainly have to be very thoughtful about how we're going to spend it.
Dean, it's free cash, but you need your parents' permission.
There you go.
I mean, Dean, I think the reason why the lost revenue approach gives the town flexibility, right? It gives you almost the same flexibility as you would have with free cash. And so I think that's why that's one that's being considered. If you go through other routes, I have an infrastructure project, I have this, you have more of the more typical restrictions around any other sort of government grant. The lost revenue gives you the most flexibility, and that essentially flows to free cash. So I think that's why the budgeting concept is coming into play.
So you're backfilling your lost revenue, and then once it's your revenue, now you can spend it at your own at your own discretion. You have a lot of discretion over how it can be spent.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Kathy.
Thank you, Chris. I would assume that this has already been looked at or discussed, but if there's money, can we use it for the middle school? Can we use it for the solar array for the middle school? Can we use it to buy certain capital assets that are already in the budget so that we can lower our tax rate rather than saying, ooh, here's some money, how many new projects can we come up with?
Yeah, I like all those questions. And so that was part of the discussion. I raised the middle school at that meeting in January. All these items are on the list. That's another reason why the lost revenue approach to me makes the most sense, because the money comes and then you can decide how you want to spend it, right? So you could, you can't use it for reserves. And so I know there may be some restrictions to it. I'm not an expert in ARPA. Carrie, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think if it comes to us via lost revenue, it's our dough, the same way we would have spent property tax or local receipts in 20 or 21 when we didn't have the money. You'd have the ability to apply it.
So how much money is there, and can we reduce the cost of the school?
Well, it's a question of, the select board and the town deciding how they want to spend the dough. But I think those items were put on the list. So there's a process right now where the senior team at the town, under Carrie, and the select board took input from committees in town and individuals, and now they're sifting through it. So those items, the middle school was on the list to the extent it was.
Can we make a recommendation as the finance committee to say that's what it should do?
We could discuss that.
So could I just jump in here, and Chris, you did allude to this. So the purpose of this funding is to aid in the recovery from the pandemic. One of those purposes could be to fill the lost revenue, to plug the lost revenue. And Chris did say this, the only way that you can use this funding for the middle school is to call it lost revenue, to take it in that way, because there is a prohibition in the law, as Chris mentioned, to put this money directly to a stabilization fund or to address long-term liabilities or to, you know, to pay employee pension, retiree pensions or anything like that. So the only way you can do it is to call it lost revenue, bring it through the budget, it becomes free cash, and then as free cash could be appropriated.
So if we wanted to, not at this meeting, but at a future meeting, if you wanted to have further discussion on this, and if we wanted to have a recommendation to the select board, we could do that. But that's, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. What does anybody else think?
You're on mute.
Sorry. You know, technically, I think we can do this over time. Let it go to the budget, let it go to free cash, and then maybe appropriate it to a stabilization fund. But if we remember, the purpose of this money is from the federal government to compensate for COVID-related expenses. So the optics are a little bit unpleasant to me to do that.
Mm-hmm. Eric.
After you raised this in the meeting, Chris, I was looking at some of the guidance from the Treasury Department. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, and on this clarified lost revenue provision, the guidance from Treasury provides some examples of how the money can be spent. And the very first example in the Treasury guidance is construction of new schools.
Wow.
So I do think it's in the ballpark.
Wow.
Well, it's.
I love you.
Yes. Okay. Enough.
Okay.
Yeah. $100 million middle school. I don't know.
Well, it certainly helps.
Right. It helps.
Well, you know, Mary, I understand your comment about optics, but you know, lost revenue, you know, the impact of COVID is that, you know, we have accumulated fewer, a lower amount of revenue. It just seems to me that this school or this expenditure is very necessary. And all I'm looking to do is to reduce the burden on the citizens, which I think is in the spirit of, you know, recovery from the pandemic. That's my viewpoint.
Ray.
Is there a timing issue with the school? I mean, the school hasn't started yet, and we're talking about something that, you know, I am concerned about the optics and the spirit of the law too, or the spirit of the regs, I guess.
Yeah, I think if it comes in as lost revenue, again, you don't have the same issues with respect to timing. I think you could put it to debt stabilization without.
Well, to comment briefly on that, we are spending against our bonding authority now. All of the feasibility study and schematic design was from a prior year's authorization.
Okay.
That's come to a conclusion. And now we're going forward with designing the building plans and, you know, creating construction documents. And so we're now spending against the bonding authority. So there's money going out the door that could certainly be backfilled by this funding. Right this minute. So yeah.
No hole in the ground, but there's money being spent, right?
There's money absolutely being spent right now.
Yeah.
Parashar.
And Carrie, you may have provided these answers and they just escaped me, but is there a timeline by which the town is operating under to make decisions about where we could spend the money? And then directly related, like, is there a table showing which federal agency or state agency is the authoritative entity in terms of how you can spend this various money in different categories? Like some of this seems speculation. You got Eric looking at treasury and the first bullet up there. So like, when does this all come together? What's the plan for it all to come together and for the town to have a clear sense of timing by which you got to make the decisions and some sense of certainty that, yes, this is the final guidance or this is the latest guidance available and it's from a definitive authority?
Yeah, so we do not have a hard timetable established yet on the town side. We are still in very much in discussion with the select board, and I don't think anybody feels a strong urgency to rush out and spend this money because we have 4 years and want to be thoughtful about how we do that. So in terms of, I have absolutely.
Just one question there.
Sure.
Do we have a sense of when a deadline is so that we don't miss the deadline inadvertently as we kind of figure out where we want to spend?
Yes, so we have to have the funding committed by December 31st, 2024.
Okay.
And fully expended by December 31st, 2026. Is that right, Chris Carmody? Chris Carmody is our ARPA expert. 2026?
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? So December 31st, 2024?
Is you have to have it committed.
Committed, what does that mean? Authorized? I mean.
Right, you have to have contracts or purchase orders. You know, the funding has to be tied up in purchase orders. Is that?
Yeah, it's going to be legally obligated in a document. So, I mean, it would be nice if this fit Parashar along some clean, standard deadlines, but this is a little bit messy. And the period of performance we're looking at right now is costs incurred on or after March 3rd, 2021. The final rule, final Treasury rule goes into effect April 1, 2022, and they have provided guidance on any possible expenditures that may be conflicted between the interim final rule and the actual final rule. And then the fiscal recovery funds must be obligated, legally documented in some form by December 31, 2024, and then spent totally by December 31, 2026. I also think that the reporting will likely seek or explore options for carve-backs if there's a determination made by the Treasury Department that the funds are not actually in compliance with the Treasury rules.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And we have absolutely seen that school construction is an eligible expense. What I would say, what I have seen is it's school construction to bring equality, to address equality issues. And I don't know that I've seen anything that it's just any type of school construction. So you would have to tie it to racial equality.
And I interrupted you, Carrie. You said you don't have yet a timeline, but do you have a vision as to when you might bring it to the select board for a prioritized list, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, right now, most of our efforts are toward town meeting. And I think this is more an after town meeting, probably immediately after town meeting, but I don't know how much work we're going to be able to do to advance it between now and town meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Peggy.
Yes, I guess I just want to put my toe in the water to object to the idea of polling all the departments for new ideas. And I think the money should absolutely be directed to things that are already on the books and not, hey, wow, we just got a whole bunch of money. Let's hire new people. Let's do new projects. No, we have a capital plan. We have a huge school. And whether it has to be equality or not, I think we should kick that ball a little harder and stick to things that are already on the books. Thank you.
Okay, good. So thank you, Carrie, for the update. And I think we'll stay tuned as a committee. And if we want, we have hearings coming up, which I'm about to talk about. So we're pretty busy ourselves here for the next 30 days. So perhaps at the end of March, we'll, once we get through hearings, we'll talk about it again. But I just wanted to make sure you knew where we were and how the town is moving forward on it. Okay. All right. So the next item is the public hearing process. So we always send out the calendar for you. So we have hearings on, FinCom has hearings on next Thursday, which is the 3rd. And that's, we're going to cover the town budget, including capital items. And we have 2 citizen petitions as well on the evening of the 3rd. And then they're at 7 o'clock. Each night they're at 7 o'clock. These are hybrid, so they're in person and Zoom. We are the sponsors, right? So we run the hearing. So I'd like you to be there in person if you can. I understand some people won't be able to, and you can Zoom in, but I prefer the committee to be there in person. So we have it on March 3rd, March 10th, and March 17th, 7 p.m. at the townhouse in the hearing room. As I said, the 3rd is that we start off with the town articles. Then on the 10th is the school and CPA articles. And then on the 17th is enterprise, the enterprise groups, the light plant and sewer and water and so forth. Usually what we do is right following the hearing, we meet as a committee and we review our recommendation on the items that we heard. So we don't always conclude that night, but at least we try to get through a number of the articles. As you're aware, we have either no action or affirmative action recommendations on financial articles. So we seek to do that after the meeting. So these are long evenings, right? We sit through the hearings and then we meet afterwards. The plan would be similar to what we did after the special town meeting hearing. We're able to meet in person and on Zoom now. We can have a hybrid meeting in the select board meeting room in the townhouse. So we would adjourn from the hearing room over there to have our meeting to discuss recommendations. Okay. Any questions on that? Anything that you want to know about that? Okay, good. So what we're going to do now, I asked you to.
Christine, sorry,
yes,
yeah. Is there a number of people that need to be physically present in order to have a quorum?
No, we can at this point, we can still use Zoom for a quorum. So okay. I can use both people on Zoom and people in person. Okay, so everybody has the warrant, I assume. Everybody got your warrant in the mail. So we're going to start going through the items that are we're gonna have for town items on the 3rd. And I did want to move one item, which is, I think, I'm not sure where that one falls. Let's see here. Yeah, so CPC is number 26. And because Diane has been very patient in waiting for us to get to this article, Chris Carmody, can you promote Diane Proctor, please?
It's going in now.
Thank you. So that article is on page 25 in the warrant. And you can see the list of items that are recommended. And at our last meeting, Peggy took us through a bit of discussion on a number of the elements of that article. And we also had a rather long discussion about the Assabet Bluff item that was in there. And I know that we had a number of questions. So I know, Dean, you had a question on the, let me get it here. It's the Town of Concord Junction Village open space. So there was a question on that, and there may have been some other questions on Assabet Bluff. So I asked Diane to come, and she has kindly agreed to do so. And I'm sure, I know she might not have all the answers right now, and maybe she could get back to us if she doesn't have them, but at least we have the right person to talk to. So
thank you so much. I appreciate you asking me, and I'll answer as best I can.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, Dean, do you, Dean's now off his camera. He went somewhere. Okay, so.
I'm here.
Oh, you're there. Okay, Dean,
Yep. Do
you want to ask your question with respect to the 250,000 on Town of Concord Junction Village open space?
I'm just kind of questioning. Hold on a second here. The town of the Junction Village open space has a chunk of the land is going to be allocated to build the Junction Village buildings, and there's a whole other area that's sort of carved off. It's either riverfront area or otherwise, you know, left untouched, so to speak. 250,000 is a lot of money for park. What are we building in that space that's not the Junction Village building, Diane? That's the question, I guess.
Dean, I think the West Concord Village Advisory Committee has worked very hard on this particular item. One of the things that's happened on that land is that there are a lot of invasive species that are making the land essentially, you can't put trails on there, you can't, it's really kind of unusable, and it's going to become increasingly unusable unless it's attended to. So that's one thing I've heard from them, and I think the committee has heard from them quite clearly. The second thing is, as you notice that bridge on Route 2, you'll see that it ends very close to the Junction Village area. And so there is the presumption that a lot of people will be passing through this area. And so what they're hoping to do is to memorialize in one way through signs and other indications. What is the history of this place? It ends up, it's where all of our Civil War soldiers first rallied and marshaled themselves before they headed off. It ends up, it's also a location for, obviously, a prison that has been there for many years. And its use and its kind of importance to the town of Concord. And there are other historical markers that actually make that spot of land, particularly, Dean, if you and I are facing from toward the prison and toward the Rotary, to the west side of that chunk of land is actually very it's significant historically, which has taken a lot of work on the part of the West Concord Advisory Committee. And I think they'd like to make certain that that is noticed and not just left. Secondly, this is a time when a lot of machinery will already be there when the actual construction of Junction Village takes place. So they want to take advantage of that machinery to be able to clear out spaces and land to make planting and gardens much more easily presented. If you remember, this is a long time ago, but you and I were both there. If you remember the question about the funding of Junction Village, no money were put aside for there was all the discussion about, oh, this would be a lovely place for older people to walk and everything. So right now they couldn't walk there at all. So all of this is essentially to remedy that concern. And actually they've done a very thoughtful job. And they'll be supported by the heavy equipment that will be present at that time.
Thanks, Diane. I would be intrigued to read the file on the proposal, because $250,000, we're spending we're spending that kind of money literally across the street. We're developing Warner Pond. We're just expanding our parkland extensively. And it just feels like we're spending a lot of money on parks that,
unnecessarily.
That's
Well, Dean, I think, that's an important point to make to the public and to those people who are involved. And thank you very much.
Okay.
I think the committee felt that the design and the use of that land and making it more literally appealing than it presently is and usable than it presently is.
I get it. It's very scruffy. When I was looking at that land to understand where Junction Village would go, it is destitute over there. It's really not. It's not great. It's desolate. I mean, it's not great land. So I fully appreciate that. But as I said, we're actively, creating parks. We're spending a lot of money to fix the White Pond waterfront area, and the town is aggressively expanding its parkland. So it's a lot of money that we're ending up spending. So thanks, Diane. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate your comment, and it's an important thing for all of us to consider as we go forward. Thank you.
Dee?
Thank you. Hi, Diane.
Hi.
Hi. I do have a quick comment that I wanted to make. In listening to the Affordable Housing Trust meeting today, they said that Junction Village, they're still looking for funding
for the
project.
I know.
And so I'm just kind of wondering if money is spent to beautify or to upgrade the land that is behind the building, but also on the side, on the riverside and things like that. I'm wondering if this might be premature, that maybe we should hold off and wait until after at least the foundation of the structure is in place.
Dee, I share your concern. When they originally presented this, and the deadlines because you've done this and you've been there, you've been the chair of the committee. So this is an experienced committee in so many ways. When they presented this, the intention, the thought was that this was an ongoing project that would actually be breaking ground well before this. And guess what? Once again, it's not. They did promise, as you remember well, that they would never come back to the town for more money. So they are now scrambling around trying to find resources to make sure that this can go through. The increased costs of construction right now, I believe, plus other factors, just general inflation, has caused them to be in a hiccup rather than a straightforward line. I suspect that if they are not going forward, neither will this. And we'd have to go back to this group and say, either put this off for a year until Junction Village begins to be developed. And we can certainly hold that money in escrow, and so can they hold their development. They really cannot do this without, the reason they're doing it in this timing is that heavy equipment will facilitate the removal of so many things and the making of trails that otherwise they cannot, it would be very expensive to do on their own.
Well, it's also the case, just to go on a little bit, it's also the case that they might not be able to have access to that heavy equipment. I don't know who's paying for the heavy equipment, but that's just something that I think needs to be addressed too.
There is an agreement with the people that are doing the Junction Village project that they will lend the $200,000 actually of equipment they're lending.
Okay, good. I liked your notion though, that you could actually put the money in both open space and recreation, just bank it.
Yep.
So that's also something to consider, because we have 2.5 months before we have town meeting, but it's just a thought.
Well, if they don't, if spending on that usually starts in July, as on July 1st. But if that's not, if the Junction Village project does not go forward in this coming fiscal year, then we would have to ask them to give, literally to let us hold the money until they're ready to apply for it. And then if Junction Village doesn't happen,
you would have to ask them to do that before town meeting, because if it's agreed to at town meeting, it's their money. It's their money then at that time.
It's very.
So I don't think you could get it back from them.
Well, help me understand this, Dee, because my understanding is, and we've seen this in the past, when someone has requested money and they've been granted the money, and then they've discovered they can't spend it, they return it to the CPC. That is how we just had a lot of money come back to us this year unexpectedly. That was really a wonderful bonus in terms of spending.
Yeah, sometimes it's that projects are, they don't cost as much as what they've been allocated.
Sometimes it's that. And in one case, it was that they couldn't go forward with the project that as planned. So, I mean,
good. Okay.
You know, it's
All
interesting.
right.
I mean, they're not, they don't have to spend it. They can return it to us, and we can ask them to return it to us.
And
Okay.
Diane, you can also put conditions on the money, right?
We
Right.
do, Christine.
Right. So you could always condition, you know, this, you get this money as long as, you know.
As long as blah, 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 blah. And I believe we've already done that, Christine, in our last meeting on this particular project, because we were aware of the hiatus in the ongoing building project. But I will make certain that we have done that formally.
Good. Okay.
And I have one other question, which is in item J, which is the recreation facilities strategic plan.
Right.
Could you just talk a little bit about that? What is that inclusive of?
Well, it ends up.
What does it include?
Yeah. Speaking of parks, where's Dean?
Oh, I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm just, you don't want to watch me eat cookies behind your back.
You're right, because I'm really hungry. I definitely don't want to eat cookies.
My dessert from dinner. All right.
It ends up that it's been over a decade since all of the parklands that the recreation facility looks at have been actually studied and considered. You know, what do they need? What do they really need? What kind of community input has taken place? You know, have we worked with neighbors? Have we talked with people around a certain park area? Have we taken into account the way to expand and the way to develop and use that land well? And so the hope is that this particular study will attend to those questions. So
okay, so it's
get
land
a comprehensive plan.
Okay, so it's for land and not necessarily facilities.
It actually isn't so much, it's land, really, it's land usage.
Okay, so that's a bit of a tricky way to word it here, because it says recreation facilities strategic plan, because I looked it up to see if that qualified, right?
Right. Well, I mean,
so it's really the land aspect.
It's mostly the land aspect, Dee.
Okay.
I mean, for instance,
Okay.
I don't think the Beatty Center, for instance, is under this right now.
All right,
in their discussion or consideration. At least that was not what they and that was not part of what we discussed when they presented. I think that, you know, here we've got a lot of like, you know, right behind the Emerson Fields. How are those being developed? What's happening to them? So
okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have some questions, Diane, on Assabet Bluff. I just had a couple of questions on that one. So we had a good discussion about that at our last meeting. We've also had a copy of the memo of understanding. So I think we understand the
terrific. I'm glad you do.
Yeah, aspects of it. So the purchase price on it, which is the 2.8 million. So did your committee do anything? Did any due diligence on the purchase price at all?
You know, it's very interesting. We were told by the town that this was essentially a non-negotiable item, and it's actually 29. As you know, it's going to be more than just 2.8. It's 2.9,
right?
Because of the additional, you know, costs and fees. But we were told that this had been that, you know, various people had evaluated the land, and that was an appropriate price for the land, Christine. That question came up very early in our discussions, but we were reassured by the town planners that had been looked at very carefully.
Carrie, I thought that, didn't they have an independent appraisal done? I thought they did, no?
Yes.
Yes, we did. That was what I was going to mention. We did have an appraisal done, and the approximate appraised value was 3.2 million.
Right.
I was just going to reiterate that the package that we that was submitted included that appraisal.
Right. Okay, that's what I thought.
I've not seen that, Peggy. That's interesting. But what I was going to say is that it's actually, I think we're able to buy this if we can for less than the appraised value.
Right. That's what it looks like. And they'll make it clear, because it is clear in the MOU, but when we discuss this at town meeting, and I know this is sort of complicated because it's funded by a couple of different sources, but when we go to the townsfolk, I hope people can kind of pull it together for them. So the money that we're asking for from CPC, and then the other funds that are either from town or from individual fundraising, it doesn't include the development of the additional 3 properties for affordable housing. That would have to be done right. So I just want to make sure that when people are voting on it, that they understand you don't get the housing here. That comes later. You get the land that the housing could go on, but the actual development comes later.
And I think, Chris, that's my responsibility to make that clear when the item is presented.
Yeah.
And I have it in my notes to do so, because it's a major issue. I mean, I suspect that if they can find builders and if they need some support, they'll come back to CPC and ask for that support.
All right. I mean, I think it's going to be hard to find a developer to come and just do 3 affordable houses. Usually it's part of a larger package, right? So I think it's a little bit of a steep hill to climb, but we still may resolve it. But I just wanted to make sure that people understood that when they hear the discussion at town meeting.
Chris, for what it's worth, I was really enthused by people who had been doing this in other towns, and they seem to think there are developers who would be happy to do this.
Good.
And
so for 3 units alone,
we'll see if this works. But I'm hopeful. I was more skeptical. I've become more hopeful with conversations.
I am a bit. I see Ray, you have your hand up.
And Dee does too. So
yeah, okay. Go ahead, Ray.
Dee had her hand up first.
Hi, Dee. Go ahead.
Hey, Dee.
Okay. Ray and I were both at the Affordable Housing Trust meeting today. And I did ask a couple of questions towards the end. And one of them was about they're in full support of the project going forward, and that they signed off on the MOU. So, that's all fine. And they are willing and probably will be able, because they'll probably get funding in their little kitty again this year, but they are willing to support the construction of the 5 units. Now, my question comes in where, if in fact they can't do that, if in fact 5 units cannot be built, and then the conservation organizations have the right of first refusal if a developer, all of that. Okay, so we're on the same page here.
Absolutely.
If a developer comes in, says they'll buy it for X amount of money, and then the conservation groups have first right of refusal, which then means it could go into conservation land as well. My question is, or what will have to happen then, is that your item number I, which has half of the funds going to 150K going to open space, and, oh, excuse me, that's the wrong one.
I believe yes.
The asset bet, okay.
There are 2 asset bets on this one, so it gets confusing.
Number half.
It goes in, it goes into community housing and open space, that you would get a refund on that. You would get that reimbursed. So I just want to make sure that you're aware that if that happens, you'd still need to have your 10%.
We know that well, Dee. And what we'd have to do, as you remember, is we'd have to hold that back. And in the following year, we'd have to make up for that deficit in terms of how the spending that we undertake.
Right.
So it's not that we can't go forward with the motion without that, but if that doesn't go forward, then we're going to have to compensate for that in the following year.
Yeah. Okay.
And, that responsibility is crystal clear. It wasn't 3 years ago when I started, but boy, is it clear now.
I don't think you have to necessarily, Diane, spend it in the very next year. You have to then put it into a fund which is isolated for that purpose. As long as it's being, as the funds are tagged for that purpose, I think you're probably good, and they can
That's
be
right, Dean,
brought
but-
out at any future.
But we have to hold that money back and tag it very specifically.
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's-
that responsibility, when I know that in the years I've been on the committee, which is only 3, but in the years, during those years, we've really tried to take that money the following year and really find a way to use it, aggressively is too strong a word, but purposefully for whatever deficit we had before. So, your hand is still up. Do you have another question?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, thank you very much for all the work that you've done on this. It looks good.
Thank you, Dee. That's kind. It's been a challenging year. CPC.
Yep, it has been. It has been.
And informing the challenging. Hi, Ray.
I'm Diane. Yes, I would say that just remember that there's 2 affordable units that are already there, basically a 2-family house. So it's just the 3 that need to be built. And as someone pointed out on one of the committees, that this is not an economically sensible thing to, I shouldn't say it that way. This is not a positive economic return on that 3 pieces of land. So if you find a developer, you're going to have to underwrite their development to produce the 3 low-income houses, or the affordable houses, rather.
I anticipate that, Ray, very much. But Keith Bergman, who's, as you know, is an expert on all this, and is also was the he is described by the state head of the CPC as really the kind of maven on CPC funding and housing in particular. And he has found ways. That's the reason my optimism about this has grown up or improved. He has found wonderful ways to attract developers for this kind of project in both Rhode Island and in Massachusetts, in Provincetown. So I have a lot of confidence that he knows of what he speaks, because he doesn't tend to speak idly. So there's also the possibility that it could be picked up by
Habitat for Humanity.
Yes, that's what I was just going to say. Habitat for Humanity.
Good.
And so there are all sorts of possibilities here, but we'll keep our fingers crossed that this works well for everyone, because it's important.
Right.
Thank you, Ray. Peggy?
Yes. Diane, wow, you're really on top of this, and really appreciate your comments. It seems that if a developer doesn't have to pay for the land, we should be able to get some community housing built. The question, this is just really for the whole committee. I'm looking at the warrant, and the Article 25 precedes Article 26. So,
right.
So I don't know, Chris.
We're going to talk about 25. We're going to talk about it with Carrie.
Okay, so I just didn't know how you wanted to organize our thoughts on that, because that's all I had to say.
Yeah, no, we're going to get to it. I just wanted to get to Diane.
Oh, that's very kind. I'm up here in New Hampshire, and with our little 6-year-old granddaughter who has school vacation week.
Yeah.
Well, excellent, and you'll be snowed in tomorrow.
We sure will be.
We all will be.
Yeah, right. Listen, thank you, Christine, for making this, for inviting me, giving me
I have a question.
Oh, Mary's got a question.
I got a question. Unfortunately, my hand doesn't show up with my background, but I do have a question.
Okay.
Diane, you may or may not be able to answer this, but you know that if the town isn't able to put this together and buy the land, the owner of that property by right could build 6 houses, right?
It
could. And so what we're ending up with, though, is and I think when this was first being talked about in town, there were plans of maybe putting 11 affordable housing units or 8 affordable housing units, and we're ending up with 5. And I'm wondering, why are we ending up with only 5 when by right we could have built 6 houses? Do you know how that happened?
I can answer that a little bit, Mary. The problem is that to have those big houses there, and they would be pretty big houses, you would increase the density in that space, obviously. And you would also diminish its impact near the river, near the Assabet River, as a really pristine area. This is, if you've had a chance to walk that land at all, it's really, it's quite lovely. And if we start chopping it up and putting houses on it, we've done.
No, I'm not, no, Diane, my question isn't, should we do that? My question is, why, if by right we could have 6 units, why are we only ending up, why can't we have 6 affordable units?
Well, the thing is, it's not that you couldn't have 6 affordable units, Mary, but you'd be right back to the same question about crowding that land, putting up, bigger buildings there, and add to the density of use of that land. Now, one of the things they can do, and it's still out there being discussed, is that you could take some of those parcels that exist and its present design, and make those duplexes rather than singles, so that in the end you could actually get more affordable housing units. It all depends on what gets built and how it gets divided up and used. There's also the question of, and it's I would say that is a little more abstract, Mary, than it is tangible. You also have the question of sewage and near the river. And so there are some real questions about effluence and what impact that would have on the health of the land, the health of the river. Now, if in fact we don't buy this land, somebody can come in, and if they can demonstrate that they're able to build on that land, and that the Natural Resources Committee and all the other, and the Planning Board and all the other commissions and agencies in town say that they can go ahead, then we're not going to have much to say about it. But the idea is to try to protect as much of that land as possible, while still.
No, I agree with.
It wasn't going to ever be 5 affordable housing units on there. It was going to be 3 kind of mega houses and a couple of affordable houses.
I think I might be misunderstood. I think that what I'm saying is that if people could have gone in and bought and built 6 houses there by right.
They could.
Right. So now what we're doing is we're putting something together to preserve it. And I agree with you. That is a beautiful piece of land. And I'm all in favor of that. But what I was hoping is that if we had the right to build 6 houses by right, that they didn't have to have any variances at all, why couldn't we end up with more affordable housing units in the land that because it's hard, as we know, affordable housing in Concord is hard because we don't have land.
Yeah.
So if we have a piece of land, I guess I'm a little disappointed that we don't have more affordable housing units going there. It's a beautiful location as well. So and I was just wondering, did you know why it was only 5 and not 6 as we could have done?
My only understanding, Mary, and I'm not trying to dodge what I think is a really pertinent and actually a very important question, is that the feeling about the density of that space. And also, in order to justify, and this is a technically interesting issue, in order to justify the amount of money that the CPC is spending on that on that recreational land, on the open space, it can't be too small, because then suddenly, we're spending an awful lot of money on something that is very compact, and it would be hard to rationalize that. So in part, I know that I know that Carrie's here, but in part, the whole planning has been around those kinds of questions. And Stuart Sagamore has been a wonderful guide dog for us, who is the head of this in the state, on how to figure all this out. I do wish there were more affordable housing able to go in there.
Me too.
But the kind of density it would create, I think, has been seen as unattractive by the neighbors and unattractive in general by the town. Yes, okay. Ray?
I think it has, didn't I hear somewhere that it has to be over 5 acres to be eligible for open space conservation land? So you really, if you're going to have open space conservation land, you have to commit at least 5 acres, and they're committing 6 to it. Right. I would suspect that if you had the whole 7 acres, you would be able to put 6 houses in there. But if you're setting aside 5 or a little more, if it's conservation land, then you're restricted in terms of their buildable lot, right?
You are right. The other thing though, Ray, is that still gives us some space that might be eventually taken for affordable housing. I mean, one of the things that has not happened to my knowledge as of our last meeting is that an absolutely bright line has not been drawn.
Right.
And
yeah, that's right.
You know, and so in part, you know, I think the issue is still, and we have until May 1st, you know, to get that delineation clearly
right.
on a map.
Yeah, I was speaking more to Mary's question. I mean, it's a good question.
Thank you, Ray. That's a more intelligent response probably than mine. So there you go, Mary.
All right, good.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you very much, Diane. And we'll.
And may I say two things since I have
sure,
the second? Your discussions have been illuminating. Thank you. I look forward to the towns and the FinCom's discussion about the use of ARPA funds, because I think at the present moment it is rather vague. And the second thing is, I have said this to Dee in the past, but I wish this were not a whatever this is called, where we were just told that we could see the number of people participating in the discussion. We cannot out here. Now it says 26 participants, but before I was actually a participant, I couldn't tell that.
Right.
And as a citizen, it's very frustrating not to know who's here and who's watching. And as somebody said to me, well, I could be watching it from the television and nobody would know. Well, that's true. But I wish this would be, not that we're going to use Zoom forever, but while we can, I wish this were something that we could consider. Thank you. I'm cheating.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Okay.
Diane, I just want to make a comment about that. I think I'll take the hit for it. When we started Zoom, I was the chair, and to collect all of the members on one page so you could see all of our very voluminous membership together, we had to kind of push the other people off the screen. And the only technological way to do that was to, you know, create these webinars. And so that's really why we ended up in this mode. If you bring all 26 other people in, you can't really see all of the membership on a given individual screen. So this is a way that our committee can see each other, at least, is really why we ended up here. And I will take the hit first.
I appreciate that. Bye. I didn't mean to step in, Christine.
Yeah, it's okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Diane.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so I am going to jump around a little bit. So Carrie, can you talk about 25 and what it is, what the town is putting aside to help with 26, which is the Assabet Bluffs acquisition?
Sure. So of the $2.9 million acquisition costs, 1.2 million of it will come from the Land Conservation Trust fundraising and or a grant. The town has applied for a $500,000 grant, and in the event that that grant is not received, we have a placeholder for debt, 500,000 and a like amount of capital spending. We are hoping not to have to use that, but we don't want, because of the timing of when we'll find out about the grant, we don't want not getting the grant to be the reason why this land purchase can't go through. So we do have that placement.
Is the 500,000 in the 6 million capital plan for the town, or is it in addition to it?
It's in addition to.
It is.
And we, if you have been following any of our bond issues over the last couple of years, you know that we have received very large premiums, and often we'll have $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 in premiums that we can apply. And so we would be hopeful that we would do something similar, do as well when we issue these bonds, and that maybe we could use premium to cover this cost if it is needed. And so it wouldn't be on the tax bill.
The state doesn't require you to use premium to adjust interest?
Premium, we have to apply it to capital. It has to be for a capital project.
Right. So it goes against the cost of the project, not the debt service.
It can go directly to the project.
Okay. Okay. Okay, any questions on that? So that's what 25 is. 25 is simply talking about the fact that the town is going to, if it needs to, add in $500,000 to help get this acquisition done. Okay, if there's no other questions on 25, unfortunately, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dee. Yeah.
Okay, Carrie, this is more, I think, for you. In the presentation of Article 25, are they going to be talking about what happens if they cannot build the affordable housing units?
We certainly can. That certainly can be addressed in 25. That's probably the easiest place for that to come up.
My feeling is, you know, it's been sold as we're going to put affordable housing there, and you know, 5 parcels on the 1 acre. And when you think about that, we're also talking about you know, $200,000 just as the land value for each unit of that. And if a developer can't come in with a reasonable amount, you know, with a reasonable cost associated with each structure, it may not go through, in which case it could revert to conservation land. And so I just wonder, you know, are we being fair to the public if we don't bring this up in the discussion? Or in the presentation of Article 25?
Well, Dee, I would go.
Please, yeah, I'm sorry, Peggy?
I would go a step further. If Article 25 does not pass, then are we purchasing this land or not? What happens?
Well, if it doesn't pass, we're not purchasing it, I would think. Well, I don't know. Carrie, you better answer these questions.
Yeah, and before I do, Chris, I just wanted to make one correction when you asked about the $6.5 million. So Article 10, the debt plan of portion of Article 10 is $6 million. And so this is an additional 500,000. So they're 2 separate articles. The total is 6.5.
Yeah, that's what,
right.
That's what you said.
Yeah.
It was in addition to the 6 million. I get it. Yep.
So the question is, if Article 25 doesn't pass, is the land purchase going through? I think the intention is that the land purchase is going through. I think Delia Kay, our conservation administrator, will be making the presentation on Article 25. She can talk about the likelihood of the grant. I think she feels very strongly that the grant will be approved, but we will not know in time for town meeting.
And is she making the entire presentation?
On Article 25, yes.
Okay, so she could also speak to the housing aspect of it. I think there probably will be questions associated with that in terms of the number of units, as Mary had indicated earlier, but also if it doesn't go through, if they're just not, you know, a reasonable price to build, if you can't find a developer who can do that.
Well, they won't know that for a while though, right? Yeah, so I think they can explain, I think these are all
there is a chance.
Yeah, no, there is,
right?
Absolutely. It's a good question. And I think these are all good questions to have at the hearing as well, right? So you have an opportunity to ask these questions at the hearing next week.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yep.
Peggy. Do you have a question, Peggy, or you're?
No, I just didn't know how to lower my hand. I didn't put it up.
Okay, good.
The administrator raised my hand for me when I was talking.
Oh, okay. So you're all set. Good.
Thank you.
Any other questions on 25? Because I want to get moving here. Okay. All right. So we also have 2 citizen petitions, 46 and 47. 46 has a financial implication. I asked Phil Posner, I think I have the right name, to come and just give us 5 minutes on his request. So we have some background information before we head into the hearing, since we don't typically deal with trails items here. So Chris Carmody, can you promote Mr. Posner?
Yeah, I'll do that now.
Thank you. I see your picture, Phil. And
okay, give me 1 second. Okay.
So everybody knows we're talking about Article 47. It's on page, Article 46, pardon me. It's on page 49 in the warrant. So make sure you know what we're talking about. And
all right,
go ahead, Mr. Posner.
Good evening, folks. Thank you for inviting me. Chris, is it possible for me to share the screen?
Yep, I think so.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bear with me. Okay. Can you folks see this?
No.
No. Not yet.
It's a, there we go.
Yep.
Okay, great. So the subject of the citizens petition is the Reformatory Branch Trail. That's what's depicted on what you see on the screen. The Reformatory Branch Trail runs from the Bedford line, that's to the upper right of the screen, to Lowell Road, which is across the street from Kais Road. The trail is presently used as a recreational trail. As you folks may know, it was an active railroad line from the late 19th century until the 1960s, at which point it was abandoned and acquired by the town. And the town's sewer main, or one of the sewer mains, actually runs under the Reformatory Branch to Sewer Treatment Road. And just bear with me, see if I can get to the next screen, see if I can operate this. It's not doing me any favors tonight. So let me see if I can get to the next page. There we go. So if folks haven't been over there, this is what a portion of the trail looks like. The railroad line is pretty distinct in most places. It rises 6, 7, 8 feet over the adjoining wetlands. It's also adjacent to the wildlife refuge and several nearby residential neighborhoods. The issue with the Reformatory Branch Trail is that the trail conditions currently are fairly muddy and poorly drained in several places. There are a number of places where after a rainstorm, they're simply not passable for someone who's not a strong cyclist or is in need of assistance for a mobility device. And here's a couple of pictures so that you're clear on what I mean. To your left, the pavement you see in the center of the screen is a treatment plant road. And on the right, you can see, in that case, a tree has planted itself right in the middle of the trail. And you get a good sense of what the trail conditions are like today. So why should we do something about this? The Reformatory Branch provides access for people who live in the neighborhoods adjoining the trail, that's the eastern side of Concord, to Concord Center, to get to Concord Center by foot, by bike, or through other carbon-free mobility modes. It's consistent with Concord's climate action goals, and we can do improvements to grading and drainage, et cetera, without paving the trail. And of course, whatever we do, we have to do thoughtfully because we're adjacent to the wildlife habitat, wildlife refuge. This is what a modern trail looks like. And if you're at Walden Pond sometime, this is a section that is immediately adjacent to the crosswalk from the parking lot. This is the trail that was just installed by DCR over the last couple of years. Why do this now? And this is something that really is motivating my request that the town move forward with planning, is that the construction of the Reformatory Branch section in the town of Bedford, which will bring a paved trail to within 800 feet of the Concord line, is going to commence in 2024. This is a state project. It's on what's called the TIP, and construction bids will be solicited according to MassDOT representatives this spring and summer. Bids will be accepted, and construction is planned to commence in 2023 or 2024. Why have public funding of a feasibility study in a process? Because it provides an opportunity for all of the public to participate. Funding is necessary for a robust planning process. Funding is already available through already appropriated funds, or in the alternative, the town could seek new state grants or funds through the federal infrastructure bill, which is specifically focused on promoting active transportation. However, in order to qualify for many of the grant programs, the town has to demonstrate a commitment, and that commitment is usually by advancing funds to do a study, do the type of public outreach which is envisioned by the warrant article. And that's why my request includes a funding component. And I'm going to stop the share, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Phil. Can you talk about, and maybe you and Kerry can talk about how the 75,000 is already appropriated? So Kerry, can you talk about that?
Well, there is a $75,000 appropriation in a prior year capital for trails. It is, I would say it, I can't remember the exact year that it's in. I don't know if Phil actually mentioned that. It is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Planning and Land Management, and I'm not sure that they would agree that they don't need that funding, but it is an article for a similar purpose that was appropriated at least a few years ago that has not been expended.
Okay, thank you. Phil, have you spoken with the Department of Planning or Land Management to know whether they think that money can be used for this?
Their response to me was this was not within their planning agenda for the next several years.
Okay, so they most likely would say no. So that would mean somebody else has to pay for it, right? They're probably not going to give up their budget for it.
I think that's probably fair, unless you know, the policy direction from the town meeting suggests otherwise, and if the selectmen or the select board were to suggest otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, though, that $75,000 is not the exclusive opportunity to obtain funding. So there are quite a number of funding sources that are available for projects of this nature. There is a trails grant that's available from Department of Conservation and Recreation, but that's a reimbursable trail grant, that similar to what I suggested before. In order to qualify for the grant, the town has to advance funds and seek reimbursement. In addition, the federal government, through the INVEST Act, that's the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill that we've all heard about, has specific appropriations. It's on a competitive basis, but those appropriations are for so-called active transportation projects, and this would fit within that rubric. Those appropriations would be available not only for construction, but for planning.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the the folks in town in town staff who are in charge of this sort of a project, excluding, I guess it's separate from the Trails Committee, but the people who actually work for the town, you've been to them as well? Is this part of anybody's plan? I guess, have you made the request to have it be somebody's budget?
Yes. And I can say that in my experience dealing with municipal government for many years, both as a citizen and as an attorney, initiatives come from various sources. Initiatives sometimes come from the town staff, sometimes they come from elected officials, and sometimes they come through the public, through the town meeting. In this case, I think that in order to move this idea forward, a town meeting decision is going to be required. As I said before, if we were in a situation that was 10 years ago and the idea of the Reformatory Branch Trail in Bedford being a matter of speculation, I think the idea of planning and being prepared might not be as pressing. But the reality of the situation is that we have a construction project that will begin in 1.5 to 2 years. It will end in 2.5 to 3 years. And we're going to have quite a number of folks coming to Concord on their bicycles on the Reformatory Branch from Bedford. So we have a changed condition, and suggesting that it's not appropriate to plan, it's not appropriate to reprioritize plans, seems, in my view, to be ill-considered. So I'm happy to say I have a difference of opinion with the staff, and I think we have a wonderful staff. I'm not going to suggest anything other than that.
All right, thank you, Phil. I'm going to go around the room here. Parashar.
So I've got a couple of questions. One is, and you can answer this one last, but I'll put it out there. I'm curious how Article 46 and 47 are connected. 47 talks about needing to preserve blah, blah, blah. And so I'm kind of curious what the threats are, because that's what that implies there. And given potential threats or whatever, going back to 46, if I get the story straight, and I don't mean to be cynical, I'm just trying to get this simple in my mind. Right now, there are sections of the trail which are difficult to pass, especially for folks on bikes and folks with mobility issues, everything else, drainage issues and everything else. You talk about the fact that the trail doesn't necessarily have to be paved when you improve those conditions, and that's great. And then you're talking about, well, we need to plan because there's going to be a paved trail in Bedford that ends here. And I'll be a cynic for a minute and tell me what, aside from mobility issues and things of that nature, the fact that people are going to be riding a paved trail in Bedford when they come to the Concord line, where the trail goes back to primitive conditions, I'm not quite sure why that necessarily why we need to change the condition of the trail in Concord just because of that. I'm having a hard time struggling with that aspect of the rationale. Again, not arguing that we shouldn't improve the conditions, but I'm just having a difficult time because in my mind, I can sort of see people turning around, say, well, I'm not going to go there because it's impossible. So I guess that's where I'm having a little bit of difficulty. So I don't know if you can help me understand why we need to plan, et cetera, just to do some improvements, just because things are happening across the line. And then in particular, what are the potential, what does it say here? There's something about threats, recent threats to the survival. So I'm curious, we spent $75K for planning and yet there's a threat to the survival. Can you help me understand how those are connected? Thanks.
I can't speak to the other warrant article, Mr. Patel. I don't think there are threats to anyone. And I try very hard, and I've tried very hard to be sober, clear about what I think the future may hold with respect to the use of public facilities. But what I can say is that in survey after survey in the town, most recently in the Envision 2030 study, the public has suggested and requested that we make active transportation networks in the town. So in other words, we provide safe and accessible and comfortable places for people to walk and bike, and so that they can get from place to place without having to get into their car and arrive in Concord Center. One of the things that is true about the Reformatory Branch Trail is that it doesn't exist in isolation. It is part of a much larger network of trails extending all the way from Cambridge to Concord. And people, to be honest, want to come to Concord. They've wanted to come to Concord since 1635. And there's a reason, because it's a really great place. And I can certainly wax eloquent on how wonderful it will be, and it could be, for people to safely use their bikes and get here without a hassle, and how uncomfortable people feel on Route 62. So when they get to Route 62 at the end of the paved section, and they're asked to go on Route 62 to get to Concord, some people will actually be deterred. Other people will go and they'll be wondering why Concord is asking people to ride in a place that's uncomfortable, feels unsafe, and is, fairly heavily trafficked. This is why I think planning is a good idea. I'm not talking about construction. I'm not talking about actually moving a spade of earth. But what I'm hoping is that we'll have a very robust planning process in which issues like this can be discussed with folks who know what they're talking about at the table. That's why there's a funding component. I think one of the issues with just having a public outreach project without having folks who know what they're talking about at the table is you get the kinds of things that may be in the other warrant article, which again, I don't want to comment on it because it's not my warrant article. But my hope is that a good planning process will have both professional input and an opportunity for folks in town to participate.
Great, thank you. Mary?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mr. Posner. I've got a few questions. I'm looking at the wording of your article, and it says, to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum not less than $75,000. And I'm curious about the wording. It almost sounds like a blank check.
Well, my hope was, and I reached out to a planning professional, he's a landscape architect, and asked him what would be a reasonable consultant's fee for the type of multiple session public charrettes and work product, which would include a feasibility study. What would be the minimum someone would suggest would be the price tag? And he said $75,000 would be the minimum. I'm not suggesting that it be a blank check. I certainly understand that your committee's job is to put round numbers on things. And I think that that's the basis of that $75,000.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if anybody, well, I guess I'm wondering also, $75,000 for a feasibility study seems steep to me. When I looked at your presentation that you sent out, it looks like we have a maintenance problem on that trail and so I'm just 75,000 at a minimum seems steep to solve the problem that I saw in your slides.
So I guess what I would say is I would invite all the members of the committee to join me after a rainstorm and walk from one end to the other. And I would ask them to consider what it would be like to do it in a wheelchair. Part of what I'm suggesting that the town do is what I'd hope will happen is that we have an accessible trail where folks who have mobility issues will feel comfortable and welcomed. Right now, we don't have a maintenance issue, we have an access issue. And without access, I think there are people who simply can't enjoy what others can, and that's not fair.
Okay, I am concerned a little bit about access and a little bit of access with bikes and pedestrians and strollers and wheelchairs. So, but I'm going to confine my comments right now to the financial aspects of this, and then we can talk more about the other aspects. I'll ask questions as a citizen at the hearing. As you know, most all articles that come before town meeting have to have a clear source of funding, and I don't see a clear source of funding here. So do you have a clear source of funding? I mean, the article that you referenced before, and I did some research on that, was an article that was voted at the 2017 town meeting that required both the NRC and the planning division to approve the spending for that 75,000. So, and I guess I'm hearing that, well, neither of them are interested in taking this on. So what would be the exact source of funding that you have earmarked for this at least $75,000 feasibility study?
If the finance committee would not agree that this should be included either as a transfer from the existing appropriation, it would be included in the levy.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical about things coming from the levy that go outside of the budgeting process. Have you thought of bringing this within the budgeting process next year's budget, regular budgeting process?
If the town meeting were to vote against it, I would certainly think that, of course. Absolutely.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Peggy?
Thank you. So, Philip?
Please call me Phil.
Phil. Okay, I went through the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Wars, and this seems a little bit familiar to me. Are you, the article looks for 75,000. Is there a group in town or in the planning division? Are you looking to upgrade? I know you're going to really not want to answer this question. Are you looking to upgrade that trail in the same manner as the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail?
Personally, I would say no. For me, if I had the authority to make all the decisions, which I don't, I would not like to see it in the same fashion as the Bruce Freeman. I personally, and I'm a strong cyclist, like the sort of more rustic way that the portions of the trail that are firm and accessible are today. But ultimately, I think that's a decision that's far in the future. What this warrant article is suggesting is that we take the first step in examining this question, not really examine the answers or think about the long-term appropriations or think about long-term design issues. And I should say, one of the things that is important to recognize about this particular trail is that it is also the location of the town's sewer main. It's also the location immediately adjacent to the wildlife refuge. So both of those issues need to be considered with people at the table who understand what's necessary to protect a public resource, public infrastructure resource, and a natural wildlife habitat.
And so two questions related to funding. Is anything like, is it on the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan, the state? No funding, not lined up there. Okay, that's fine.
I mean, this is the very first step in in this
Okay.
process. And
Okay.
if you're familiar with the Bruce Freeman, you know that it's a many multi-year process.
It's a 10 or 20-year process. Yes.
Yeah. But you know, everything starts with the first step. That's what I'm proposing.
Well, it does. I'm a little, and okay, so this is getting away from money, but just to the committee. To me, it feels like Article 46 and 47 are maybe not financial issues, they're policy issues, to pave or not pave, which is really what it came down to on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. That was ultimately put to town meeting for final design. I think the $75,000 number is sort of a minimum to get it started. It looks like a great area to me, you know, possibly to improve access. Obviously, abutters would not be interested, but ultimately, my sense is the question will be, do we pave it? Is it going to look like Bruce Freeman Rail Trail or almost like the rail trail? So I think the 75,000, whether it's this year or next year or some other year, depending on the Director of Planning and Land Management's interest, would be a good idea before related to action on Article 47. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Peggy. Brian, I think you had your hand up for a while, but now I don't see it, so.
No, my questions were answered.
Okay.
I will tell Phil wherever he went. I live close to that. I run that. I ride into Boston on that trail occasionally from time to time. I understand where you're coming from, but I tend to agree with Peggy. There's some policy issues around what you really want and sort of well defining it before we head into the funding discussion. So, but great idea.
Dean.
So thank you for the presentation. It was very instructive. I'm going to focus really on the financial side of it. You described multiple grant opportunities where the town would need to show its goodwill by allocating funding, and then grants could be applied for. We have a function right here in the town that really serves this purpose. Did you ask the CPC for funds for this before you decided we needed a segregated warrant article for this?
I did not.
Okay. Because that, you know, unless we really need to do it this year, it's a natural for a grant application at the CPC. It's in the recreational and open space spaces that they are about. So, you know, if it doesn't go forward this year, that's a natural place where you could find this funding. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. See no other questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Posner, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the hearing next week.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go back to the beginning here, and I think, Carrie, can we do town capital? Can we do number 10 and go from there?
So sure, I'm not really sure what you wanted to do. I don't have a presentation.
Okay.
We are expecting to do that next week, but we did talk at length about the Tier 1 capital, which is the first part of Article 10. The second is the Tier 2 capital. We have each of the items, each of the projects listed individually. They total $4.5 million, the largest of which is for the road improvement plan at $2 million. We do have a significant amount for culvert and bridge repairs. This is the first time that we've included that as a separate line item in capital for a very long time. You may have, one of you maybe is an observer to the Public Works Commission, or maybe heard at a select board meeting where we talked quite a bit about the need for increased spending for our road infrastructure. And we're not there yet this year, but we did the best that we could given what we had available. We do prepare a 5-year plan, and while we only appropriate a year at a time, we do try to look long-term and don't really like a lot of surprises. So we did the best that we could. We did have one item that kind of was advanced quite a bit, and that is the second item on the list for 133, 135 Kais Road, a roof replacement. We had expected to be able to get a few more years out of this, and this actually appeared later in our capital plan, but we've had some issues and we needed to advance that. That building houses our public works operations, including water, sewer. So that project, the cost of that will be split with the water and sewer enterprise funds as well. I believe it's in total, it's closer to $750,000, that project.
Okay, thank you. And the Giroux Park improvements, is that the same project that's building the outdoor bathrooms and picnic area and so forth? That's that same project?
It is. My thought is, I know you've had a lot of discussion about the parks projects. My thought is that we line up funding for the phases that we've talked about, and not that we advance any more parks projects at this point, but just try to finish what we have going. So there's some $150,000 for Emerson Park. We have some additional improvements probably in the following year. We have a small project at Rideout. We need to complete the bathroom project. That will be in fiscal 24. And then I think we will await the results of the parks master plan process, and then see how the results of that line up with some of our other capital needs, which are still extensive, as you know.
Okay, thank you. I see questions from Dee and Peggy. Dee.
Thank you. Carrie, I have a question. Are we just talking about Article 10, or can we also talk about Article 8?
Nope, we're going to talk about 10.
Okay. So in 10, could you please explain to me what you're going to be doing with the carousel preschool? It's 1E.
Yeah, so we will have a detailed presentation at the public hearing. Kate Hodges is the one who presents capital. She is the lead person, and honestly, the best person at this point in time to answer specific questions about capital items. I was not necessarily prepared to go through these in detail this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Peggy?
I'm looking at Article 6. I notice it's not on our list. So I'm trying to
Article 6.
6.
What is it?
Okay, this is the personnel bylaw.
Okay, we're not talking about it.
We've added a holiday.
No, that's not on our item. So that's
okay. Well, it's
not FinCom's item. Sorry.
Holiday. That's a lot of money. Okay, fine.
We're not doing it. Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else on item 10? Dean?
Chris, I actually just have a procedural question. This is starting to feel like we're having our own personal hearing on the warrant. So
yeah.
I'm just wondering what your goals are for
My
this.
goal was just to make sure anybody had specific questions that they needed to know something in advance of the hearing, that we could get it out. That was really my purpose.
Okay.
So some of these we haven't, most of them we haven't talked about at all. Most of them aren't big, other than the capital one for town. So the other ones are like the senior means tested items and so forth. I was just trying to speed through them so we could make sure everybody knows what we're going to hear next week. That was the purpose. You don't want to do that, we don't have to do it.
No, it just feels like we're getting into like a mini hearing, and we don't, and like Carrie's not prepared to, you know, I don't have a hearing, you know, I don't have.
Well, no,
yeah.
Okay.
That's all. I'm happy to go do whatever you'd like. It's not a problem.
Okay.
I just wanted to kind of get a ground rule a little bit.
Okay. So so I think we're okay on 10. Dee, I see your hand is still up. Are you done on 10?
Oh, I am done with 10.
Okay, thanks. So Carrie, 11 and 12 are recurring items, right? That's related to the senior means tested tax exemption. I don't think there's anything new on those. Does anybody have any particular questions on 11 and 12? No. Okay, we can move on from those. We do have 13 and 14 are similar to what we had before. I think there's one shift there, which we mentioned, I think last time, which is the addition of an advisor to assist in the administration of the investments of the OPEB trust. I think that's really the only new item there. Is that fair, Carrie?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions on 13 or 14 for Carrie? Not, I'll keep going. 15, I think, Carrie, you told me that one is being pulled. The warrant is not going to be, that article is not going to be offered up. Is that correct? That's electrification trust?
That's correct.
All right, so that one will be waived. The individual is going to do something different. Okay, and then we come all the way past the school items to Article 20, which is our article on stabilization. That goes in the school items, blah, 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 blah. Affordable housing, which is Article 24. So that one we've talked about before. You know, that's the recurring request for $500,000, which, as we talked about a little bit earlier, is likely to go to ARPA. Okay, that's that one. We talked about 25. That's the $500,000 for in lieu of a grant to assist with the purchase of Assabet Bluff. We talked about 26, which is CPC. 27. You want to talk about that one, Carrie? Is that new?
Sure. This is a request to create a new revolving fund for our visitors center and tourism function. A revolving fund is set up for the purpose of collecting receipts associated with a specific activity and then using them to pay for the costs of that activity. So here, the visitor center sells merchandise, offers tours and other programs for a fee, and then those fees are used to pay for the cost of the part-time staff that work in the visitor center or the tour guides that give the tours.
Okay, so we're just setting up a revolving fund for that.
Yes.
A separate one. And what's the volume of funds that would be in there? It's not significant, is it?
So it's estimated at $70,000.
Yeah.
So the revolving fund, it's a two-step process. You have to establish it, and then on an annual basis, you have to appropriate the budget for it. So the appropriation of the budget for all of the revolving funds is in the following article.
Okay, that's 28.
Yeah.
And that we've seen before, and now it's added with the visitor center for 70,000. Okay, Dean, you have
I have
a
my hand
question
up on that one,
yeah.
if I could ask
yeah,
a question.
Sure.
So Carrie, have we unwound what I'll call the business development position from being associated with the visitor center? It used, we had this kind of multi-year process of funding the business development half person out of the visitor center budgeting in the rec department, the whole rec department. So this is really unwinding the visitor center from the rec department. Is that true?
That's true. But the full-time position is still economic vitality and
That's it,
tourism.
economic vitality, sorry, economic vitality, yeah.
And tourism, so that is still wound together, but it is no longer tied to the recreation revolving fund.
Okay, thank you. So that is still, that economic vitality role is still kind of in this revolving fund now. That's where that's going to sit.
The position is in the general fund budget. This revolving fund is just the visitor center portion of that division. So the division is economic vitality and visitor center. The visitor center portion runs through the revolving fund. The economic vitality portion runs through the general fund budget.
Okay.
But it's one staff member.
Right. It's just a little confusing. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. 29, Carrie? Is that
29 is the parking meter fund, the appropriation of parking meter receipts to pay for related expenses.
Is that new, or is that sort of a renewal of?
So this
of the parking meter? I know there was a pause on it. I'm trying to understand. Yeah. Does the reinvestment actually go back into public transportation and maintenance of parking meters? I mean, 400,000 is a lot of money, a lot of revenue for the town. Does it, should there be some language around that to ensure that money can be reallocated somewhere else if necessary, or is this standard language? I guess is my question.
It is standard language, and these so the $400,000 really is a maximum not to exceed. Before COVID, we would collect $300,000 to $350,000 in parking receipts, and those receipts can only be used for parking enforcement or public transportation initiatives. So they can't be used for to pay for an economic vitality director, but they can be used fairly broadly as long as it's related to parking or public transportation.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on that one? That's the end of the articles that I want to cover. That's what we're going to hit in the discussion for the town hearing on the 3rd. So thank you, Carrie and others, for helping us get through that. The next item is Lois. So we have our FinCom report coming due at the end of April. So she's going to walk us through how we're going to get that pulled together.
Christine, do you think I should try? I don't actually know how to do this, but should I share my screen so I put the outline up?
That would be great.
Or do you want it? All right.
Do you know how to, you don't know how to do it? Let me see if
yeah, if you can do it, because wait, let me just see if this works out.
Okay.
No, this doesn't seem to be working. So okay. If you don't mind doing it.
Good. Why don't you start your intro and I will find it and put it up.
I can share it. I have it. I have it up on my
It was attached to the email I just sent you.
It sounds like Carrie can do it.
Thank you, Carrie. I'll learn before the next time I have to do this. Anyway, those of you who were around for last year may remember that Mary and I worked closely with Carrie, and we did an overall revamping of the report. So the outline I did of what I'm suggesting we do this year is really based on what we did last year. That means that if any of you have any significant issues with how we presented the materials, please communicate them to Christine or to me, and we can incorporate those before we move forward, before we get too locked in. But the general sense seemed to be that this worked fairly well. So working off that outline, there are portions of it that are going to be edits from last year. Chris gets the task of writing the chair's letter. What happened last year was that Carrie worked very closely with Mary on that. It was Mary's work product, but Carrie helped with checking out numbers and specific references. Carrie, are you going to be our lead on this, given your new exalted status?
I'm afraid so.
Oh, I'm so sorry for you, but pleased for me. That you just made my whole upcoming month so much better. Thank you so much. So that means
I hope you still have John there to help.
John is still here.
And she's got two people to replace her.
I know. It took two.
Yeah. Yeah, and
that's because, as we know, it takes two men to do one woman's job.
Thank you. Hey. Thank you for saying it, so I didn't have to. There's a section of the report, and again, most of these are only a couple of paragraphs long, describing the FinCom guideline process and the specifics of what the guideline was this year. Parashar will do that. And can work off of last year's text, but obviously with the new numbers, the updating of the numbers. Property taxes will be Carrie, and the 5-year tax projection was Dean's personal baby through this. Greg, who isn't here to defend himself.
He was warned. He was warned.
He was warned.
Greg is not here.
No, he's not. He's on vacation this week.
Okay.
Greg will be doing with Dean and Parashar to review and help him with it. And I will just make the statement right now. This is the part of the report where I say, I do not understand this. So whatever you guys say, unless Carrie says it's wrong. So this is when you can count on me to edit.
So Parashar on this one, right? So before, if you remember the process, right, we would go around to the committee members and ask them their opinion on how costs would grow by category, and then Dean would bring it all together for us. Given that we have the projections that were provided by the budget units, be good for you and Dean and Greg to maybe kind of put your heads together and think about how you want to do that this year, because it seems like we have a much better basis for those projections.
So as a note, last year, Carrie just provided that stuff to us. So we got Carrie's projections we didn't survey the
we didn't? No.
Last year.
No,
I don't think so.
No, you did, Dean. You did. I don't know how much of a contribution any of us made, but you did actually.
Maybe you didn't use it.
But anyway, Carrie had made those last year, so I think some of those were already baked in the cake last year. So maybe we only had you estimate like a subset, a very small subset.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And then there's a section of the report which summarizes our recommendations. And what we did last year was I literally prepared a chart with the number of the article, its name, and FinCom, and the select boards. We folded in the select board's recommendation for action or no action, and with a sentence or two for the of the reason for the decision to recommend affirmative action or no action. I will do that again, so I'll keep filling in that information as we compile it. But on some of the articles that are particularly important, we'll be asking people who have real knowledge of the underlying facts to do some drafting of a paragraph or two that will be slotted in there. And that would basically be aligned with whatever your observer assignment was. So, so that's something that I'm the responsible party for making the framework, but some of the text will be coming from people who know much more about the specifics of individual articles and their background than I do. So that's a heads up. And then there's a whole bunch of the report that's Carrie. And I'm so glad she's still going to do this. And then the other place where there'll need to be some general committee-wide support is, in addition to the very summary recommendations that we have in the chart that covers all of the articles, we highlighted certain key areas in the last report, and I think that's important to do. We had a section that I listed the ones that we did last year: use of free cash, the town budget, capital improvement. We grouped together the articles that dealt with education. For this year, we really should have an explanation about the stabilization fund and how that's going to work, because that will be new to people. So that section, CPC also had a separate highlight section. That's just an opportunity to give people, that's just a way to give people the opportunity to dive a little deeper into some of the major financial items. And that's another one that will be kind of a group effort. Again, we'll work out the structure, but people will be asked to write up narratives that will then be inserted into the appropriate place. So coming soon to an email address near you will be requests that you do some of these things. Just in terms of timing, the drop dead date on the report is mid-April, but obviously we don't leave this till the last minute. Most of the report really should be written with time to do corrections and reformatting and checking and updating of numbers by the end of March. So that the only thing that happens after our last FinCom meeting, which I think is the April 7th, to make our final recommendations, or we vote on a final recommendation, it should be to insert the results of those final votes. We should really plan on having the meat of this together by the end of March, so that there's a week or two to make final adjustments. And the numbers can sometimes be a little bit of a moving target, so Carrie keeps on top of that. But hopefully this year it'll go. It didn't go unsmoothly last year, but hopefully this year we'll be even a little bit further ahead of the curve, because I'm anticipating we'll stay with the basic format and structure that we used last year. But again, if people have thoughts about that or concerns about it, or would like to see something handled differently, if you reach out to Chris and me, this was a new approach last year. It can always be refined and improved, and any input is welcome.
Great. Thank you, Lois. That's terrific.
So Lois, I think you overlooked one assignment. Maybe and that's cover art. Cover art is like critical for the finance committee report. It has
that's
to have
the other thing.
a free song, a humor, a little,
I don't do cover art. I'm sorry. No way.
And I did notice, and I don't know if it's right. And Carrie, I know I sent a note to, this, I believe, could be our 100th report.
Oh my, wow.
Yes. So FinCom was formed in 1922.
Wow.
So
that's cool.
Yeah. So we might want to talk about whether this is the 100. We might have something maybe in the cover art or somewhere that celebrates 100 years of FinCom.
There you go.
So I would recommend, if we want to do that, we should reach out to Anita Techley and Ruth Lauer, and they would love to contribute.
Okay.
That's a good idea.
That's a good idea.
They would be perfect people to, help us.
Great. Thank
you.
Great.
Good suggestion. Thank you.
Okay.
If you don't want to do it yourself, you need to find someone else.
Right. Exactly.
Peggy, you volunteering.
Right. First law.
Advice to live by.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground tonight, but I don't want to, if there's anybody who has an observed report that's important, or that's somehow impacting some of the articles we're going to be listening to, or that perhaps are going to be on somebody else's agenda, and you think it's important for FinCom to hear, we haven't had much time to do this, so I wanted to actually put it on the agenda tonight. If there are any observer reports that somebody wants to make, now's the time. And seeing no one has their hand raised. Okay, I guess we're doing well in terms of our topics. Okay, so I think we have public comment is next, I think. So let me see. I see, I see a Q&A.
I see Ellen Quackenbush.
Ellen Quackenbush was asking. So Ellen, the question is now, the time is now. So if you raise your hand, Chris Carmody can promote you and we can take your question.
So Ellen is coming in now, and Ned Perry also has his hand raised, so I will promote him as well.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Ellen. You're on mute. You're on mute, Ellen.
I was saying you guys work late and you seem like you laugh a lot, so that's a good thing. So this is about Article 46. And I just wanted to comment, just a quick comment. Phil Parsner positions his engineering, drainage, and feasibility study as a good first step. But I actually think it assumes a solution, drainage and grading, without first establishing the problem. And I would suggest a better first solution might be a needs assessment, perhaps led by the Trails Committee, that would establish the current situation, kind of the big picture. And some of the topics might be current usage, potential usage, concerns of users and the butters. And I think most importantly is a deep dive into the environmental impact to Great Meadows of any change in the trail surface or increased trail traffic or speed. So I would just encourage not even to do a feasibility study that names a solution, but rather to do a needs assessment. Get the big picture first and then think about options. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Ned.
Thank you, Christine. Ned Perry, 362 Bedford Street. I thank you all for the great work that you do for our town meeting and our wider Concord community. I will admit I am a bit biased in favor of the role of the Finance Committee in our town government process. I also will admit to having appointed the chair of the Select Board to her previous role as a member of the FinCom committee, although she may not remember her days on the FinCom. Hopefully, beginning in May, there will be another former FinCom member on the Select Board who will better remember her FinCom days. I trust all of you will, in fact, insert and assert yourselves in the entire process of all the ARPA funding, not just the second half of it. You're terrific. You do the role of our eyes, ears, and thinking on the budget. Please look at the entire ARPA funds and not just be restricted to the second half by whomever is restricting you to the second half. Thank you very much. Continue the great work.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Are there any other comments, Chris? Are we all set?
So I'm playing Chris's role right now. Oh. Sorry, I wasn't. I'm like, Chris, why aren't you responding? He's not on the call. No, there is nobody else.
There is no Chris. Oh, he's abandoned us. Okay. All right. So I think we're all set. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Okay, I'll take a roll call vote. Chris Reynolds, aye. Dean Banfield.
Aye.
Peggy Briggs.
Aye.
Dee Ortner.
Yes.
Brian Taylor.
Chris said it's 10:15. I'm going home.
Yeah, baby. Right.
Yes.
Ray Andrews. Mary Hartman.
I'm already home. Yes.
Don Kupka.
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg.
Yes.
Kathy Kukalo.
Yes.
Lois Washoff.
Yes.
Parshar Patel.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned. I look forward to seeing you at the hearing.
Thank you.
Don, I hope
very
you
much.
enjoyed your first FinCom meeting.
Good meeting.
Night, everyone.
Good meeting, Chris.
Thank you.